During the height of the reign of the Empire, Darth Vader decided that in order to be a true Sith, he required an apprentice. This apprentice was none other than Starkiller, a being so powerful that he could even challenge the Emperor himself. However, the stories of both these characters actually share a lot of similarities. In this video, we'll cover the backstories and entire lives of these two in chronological order, starting off with Vader's secret apprentice, Starkiller. Chapter 1. Discovered by Vader. It was the height of the Clone Wars, and the Jedi were scattered all across the galaxy, protecting Allied systems against the Separatists. Galen Marek, a Jedi general, was on the planet Talos, eager to prove himself while fighting for the Republic. During his stay on Talos, he became acquainted with Mali, another Jedi. Despite their differences in opinions, with Mali sympathizing more with the victims of the war instead of the Republic, the two grew emotionally close. Emotional and romantic attachments were prohibited in the Jedi Order, but Galen and Mali married in secret. They eventually renounced their allegiance to the Jedi Order, exiling themselves to Kashyyyk just before the end of the Clone Wars. Their self-imposed exile spared their lives when Chancellor Palpatine, secretly the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, issued Order 66. The Republic's clone army slaughtered the Jedi one by one, killing almost every one of them throughout the galaxy. Palpatine would eventually reorganize the Republic into the Galactic Empire while branding the Jedi as traitors. Darth Vader, formerly Anakin Skywalker, became the Empire's enforcer, an attack dog sent after any Jedi who survived Order 66. Although he felt guilt for not being there to help his Jedi comrades, Galen decided it was best for him and Mali to move from one planet to another, before deciding to stay hidden and live among the Wookiees of Kashyyyk. During their time on that planet, the two Jedi exiles gave birth to a son named Galen Marek. The boy was born with the gift of the Force, much like his parents. Not long after Galen's birth, Mali died defending the Wookiees from a group of Trandoshan slavers. During the early years of the Empire, Darth Vader's sole mission was the purge of the Jedi that had survived Order 66. The Sith Lord had recently learned that the Wookiees of Kashyyyk had been hiding a Jedi for years, prompting him to launch an invasion on the planet. While the rest of the Imperial forces focused on the Wookiee uprising, Vader pursued his own objective of hunting the fugitive Jedi. Vader easily carved his way through Wookiee fighters before reaching a hut that had the Marek family crest. There, he confronted the exiled Jedi, who proved to be no match for the Dark Lord. Vader easily overwhelmed Galen, but sensed the presence of a much more powerful Force wielder. Thinking this was Kento's master, Vader used a Force choke to grip the defeated Jedi, demanding to know where the stronger foe was hiding. Marek, however, told Vader that the Sith Lord had already killed his master long ago. As Vader was prepared to kill Galen, he felt his lightsaber slipping from his fingers. It had been telekinetically pulled by the young Galen Marek almost by instinct. Vader quickly deduced this was Kento's son and the very same powerful presence he felt moments ago. As Galen urged the boy to run away, the Sith Lord quickly crushed his throat, leaving Galen orphaned. Left shocked and horrified, Galen pointed Vader's lightsaber at him before a stormtrooper squad arrived. The squad's Imperial commander, realizing the boy was a threat that needed to be disposed of, signaled his troops to execute Galen under the assumption that this was what Vader wanted all along. However, they were fatally wrong. The Sith Lord telekinetically pulled his lightsaber back to him, slaughtering the commander and the rest of the squad in front of the boy. He wanted no witness to what he was about to do next. Instead of killing Marek, Vader commanded him to come with him, taking him to a personal Super Star Destroyer, the Executor, which was still under construction at this point. The young Galen was about to experience pain like he had never before. A new life lay ahead of him. By the way, we're having a special offer for our Dark Lord Episode 5 and Rogue Apprentice sabers in this video. Use the code STARLORD10 to get 10% off any of these sabers and also get 2 free combat sabers for a limited time only. Now, let's get back to the video. Chapter 2. Training under Vader. Darth Vader's ultimate goal, like any other Sith Lord, was to betray his master and take his place. But he wasn't strong enough to face Darth Sidious on his own as he was. The wounds he suffered in the duel on Mustafar had weakened his potential in the Force, while leaving him vulnerable in his machine-like state. To that end, he had always wanted his own apprentice, one powerful enough to stand by his side to defeat the Emperor. That was what Marek was for, because his potential in the Force was almost on par with Darth Sidious himself, an unprecedented talent that only came once every generation. Given the codename Starkiller, the traumatized apprentice had repressed all the memories of his life before he met Vader. He did not know any life other than the one he had lived ever since the Sith took him to the Executor. So, for nearly 2 decades, he trained in the ways of the Sith under Vader, honing his talents in the Force and turning him into a weapon who had enough potential to become powerful enough to challenge Sidious. But Vader was not a patient and forgiving master. He was no Jedi after all. He trained Starkiller in ways that were more like torture. One training session saw him dropping the young Galen on the planet Honoghr without any weapons, and then ordering a party of Noghri death commandos to hunt him down. He wanted his apprentice to learn how to survive in the harshest and cruelest ways. To that end, Starkiller also learned how to draw power from his hatred, one of the Sith's greatest strengths. However, as he didn't have enough time to completely dedicate to Galen's training, he had Galen develop his own methods and techniques by engaging in tests and sparring sessions with his training holodroid, Proxy. This droid was capable of imitating Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi, using their fighting techniques to spar with the apprentice to hone his lightsaber skills. Proxy also regularly attacked him, consistent with Vader's wishes, with the intent to kill to keep Starkiller's senses and wits sharp and ready for any surprise. After all, his primary programming was to kill the apprentice, ensuring he would never hold back whenever they sparred. However, Starkiller and Proxy developed a close bond beyond that of master and droid. Their friendship was one of the reasons Marek wasn't entirely devoid of compassion, despite his harsh upbringing under Darth Vader. But growing up in cruelty and believing he needed trauma and pain to grow stronger, Starkiller forced himself to suffer. During one of his self-inflicted horrors, he had Proxy chain him in the dark while depriving him of nourishment, until he could successfully use the Force to assemble a lightsaber. He failed in that exercise, but grew stronger because of the pain and suffering he felt. This was but one of many challenges he'd impose on himself. Still, no matter how strong he got, the one thing he couldn't do was use the Force to experience visions of the future, a skill quite common among Force-sensitive individuals. Breaking from his usual routine would surprise him because he couldn't see into the future. This failure frustrated him, making him believe he wasn't strong enough just yet. After all, he was raised to be the strong and powerful for one singular purpose: the assassination of Darth Sidious. He was driven not only by his loyalty to Vader, whom he considered the closest thing to a father, but also by his desire to fulfill what he thought was his reason for existing. To that end, he longed to be a true Sith apprentice. While Vader trained him in the ways of the dark side, he was yet to truly acknowledge him as an apprentice. Believing Starkiller was not yet ready to fulfill his purpose. So, for years, the Sith Lord sent him on various missions as his personal assassin and enforcer, even killing Imperial personnel Vader deemed problematic. Starkiller never had any problems killing the Empire's own people, believing this was his form of service to the Empire. In 3 BBY, Starkiller engaged his master in what seemed to be a routine practice duel between them. However, at the end of the sparring match, Vader ordered Starkiller to kneel before him. The assassin was confused, not knowing why Vader would order him to do something he had never done before. At first, he thought his master had grown disappointed in him. After all, Vader trained him to learn how to be strong or to die as a failure. But his loyalty to Vader overcame his confusion as he obeyed and waited for death. However, Vader acknowledged Starkiller for the first time, formally knighting and recognizing him as his apprentice. The Sith Lord declared Starkiller's training complete before giving him the most important test of his life at that time. He was sent to kill Master Ram Kota, a powerful Jedi survivor of Order 66. Chapter 3: Meeting Juno and Ram Kota. Ram Kota was one of the Jedi Order's best generals during the Clone Wars. He was considered a military genius, capable of not only fierce combat, but incredible tactics that turned him into a legend. Only a few Jedi generals, including Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, surpassed his accomplishments during the Clone Wars. But what really stood out about Kota was his refusal to use clones for battle. It was not because he knew they were wired to betray the Jedi. Instead, he simply didn't think the clones were fit for battle and didn't trust them. So he relied on his own militia. With no clones to betray him, Kota survived Order 66 and fled to the Outer Rim, where he dedicated his life to fighting the Empire. At the time Vader ordered Starkiller to kill Kota, the former Jedi Master was attacking an Imperial shipyard above Nar Shaddaa. He was told to bring Kota's lightsaber back as proof of his success. Vader also told his apprentice to leave no witnesses behind, even if it meant killing their own forces, an order Starkiller struggled to comprehend because of his loyalty to the Empire. But the assassin hid his feelings because he did not wish to displease his master. Starkiller convinced himself that killing Kota and eliminating Imperial witnesses along the way were just parts of his rise as a Sith. As Starkiller approached his personal starship, the Rogue Shadow, he was surprised to see a new face greeting him. This was his new pilot, Juno Eclipse. While the assassin had become a skilled pilot in his own right, Vader often assigned him pilots so that he could focus on his missions instead of piloting his ship. But being Starkiller's personal pilot wasn't easy. Not only because the missions required stealth and secrecy, but also because Vader wasn't an easy master to work for. There had already been 8 pilots assigned to him before Juno. One of those pilots was even executed under Vader's orders for being tardy. More than that, this was the first time Starkiller had a female pilot. But Juno was not an ordinary pilot. She was accepted into the Imperial Academy at 14, eventually graduating at the top of her class. Juno quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a captain and attracting the attention of Vader, who was once the most skilled pilot in the Republic. Juno earned the command of the Black 8 Squadron, Darth Vader's elite unit of 8 TIE fighter pilots. Her skills were elite as far as pilots were concerned, but Juno didn't have the ruthlessness Vader wanted from the commander of the Black 8 Squadron. Though she considered working under the second most powerful man in the Empire at honor, she also didn't share the same love for brutality that the Sith Lord had. The Sith Lord's tactics weighed down on her, testing her loyalty several times. One such time was the bombing of Kalos, where she assaulted a beaten and defenseless planet to sterilize it under Vader's orders. She had obvious doubts about the necessity of the bombing, but still complied out of loyalty to her superior. Vader sensed all those doubts and her lack of ruthlessness, prompting him to reassign Eclipse to the Rogue Shadow as Starkiller's personal pilot. Starkiller himself, being unfamiliar with Juno's background, believed having the female pilot around was just yet another one of Vader's many tests for him. As the trio departed for Nar Shaddaa, Proxy informed Starkiller about Kota's background as a respected Jedi general during the war. But for many years after surviving the Clone Wars, Kota disappeared into hiding, eluding the Empire for nearly 2 decades before suddenly reappearing in a not-so-subtle way, attacking the Empire outright. The odd circumstances surrounding Kota's sudden appearance convinced Starkiller that the Jedi deliberately wanted the Empire to find him for what was still an unknown reason at that time. More doubts started to creep into Starkiller upon his arrival at Nar Shaddaa, because most of his eventual victims were Imperial forces. The only way he could steel his resolve was to convince himself this was just another test from his master. So, as he made his way through the TIE fighter construction facility on the planet, he blasted through Imperial forces, eventually chasing after any survivors who witnessed his abilities. But upon learning that Kota's militia had stormed the command center, Starkiller rerouted his destination, killing anyone in his path. Kota's forces thought he was a special kind of shadow trooper, whereas the Imperial forces believed he was a Jedi survivor. Whatever the case, the assassin hastily made his way to the command center as Kota's forces had just bombed the facility, forcing it to fall out of the sky. As soon as he reached the command center, Starkiller saw Kota patiently waiting for whoever was coming after him. But both were surprised by what they saw. The assassin didn't think the Jedi he was sent to kill was a hardened veteran because he believed that the Jedi were soft from living a life of privilege. On the other hand, Kota thought Vader was going to personally come after him, not expecting it would be this boy that stood before him. The two Force users fought a hard and close battle, with each fighter finding ways to counter their opponent's attacks, but Starkiller eventually pulled back to fight a more defensive style reminiscent of Form 3, a style he learned from his many training sessions with Proxy, mimicking the legendary Obi-Wan Kenobi's fighting techniques. Kota tried his best to break through the assassin's defenses, using slow yet deliberate attacks that he chained with quick strikes. He hoped he would tire his opponent out, but Starkiller held strong. The younger fighter realized the Jedi's guard had begun to slip, quickly prompting him to counter. During his onslaught, Starkiller realized that while Kota was skilled and strong, his age and rejection of the dark side held him back. The general could not regain the offensive, prompting him to complement the assassin's skills. With desperation taking over Kota, he used the Force to break the entire command center free from the rest of the shipyard to send it down into Nar Shaddaa's atmosphere. The duel renewed, with both fighters locking blades. Neither duelist had the advantage over the other until Kota saw a Force vision of Starkiller's fate. Kota told him that Vader wasn't always going to be the young apprentice's master, but he froze after finding out through the Force that he was going to be part of this young man's future. As that was happening, Starkiller was more concerned with overpowering the older fighter in the blade lock. Distracted by his vision, Kota could not keep up with the assassin's strength as Starkiller pushed the Jedi's blade into his eyes, blinding him. This was the first time he ever claimed victory over an actual Jedi outside of his training sessions with Proxy. A defeated Kota was stumbling backward, open for a killing blow. But before Starkiller could do so, he experienced his own vision of his forgotten father telling him to run. The assassin pulled back, believing that the Jedi was using mind tricks to confuse him into dropping his guard. But this was the opening Kota needed. He dropped his lightsaber and used the Force to shatter the windows of the command center, escaping by dropping into the planet's atmosphere. Disappointed that he failed in killing the Jedi, Starkiller retrieved Kota's lightsaber and jumped through the window, landing on the rogue shadow as it passed by. He knew that Kota was no longer going to be a problem after blinding him, but he could not celebrate his empty victory because he failed in his task of killing the Jedi Master. Still, Vader was impressed that his apprentice could go toe-to-toe with a skilled master despite failing to kill the former. Chapter 4. Starkiller's Trials Against the Jedi and the Sith. Starkiller may have bested a true and experienced Jedi Master in combat, proving his extraordinary potential in the Force, but Vader's doubts about his apprentice were more about his resolve and focus, instead of his skills. In the Sith Lord's mind, had Starkiller been more focused on his task, he would have killed Ram Kota instead of simply blinding him. So, to further develop his apprentice's skills and focus, Vader sent Starkiller on a mission to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. At that time, the temple had become a ruin of its former glory, having been destroyed by the Empire after the events of Order 66. It may have been abandoned, but the Empire still maintained troops there out of the possibility that one of the surviving Jedi might go there. So, as soon as Juno Eclipse landed the rogue shadow just outside the front gate, Starkiller was met with resistance by none other than Imperial troops. Emperor Palpatine had ordered the temple to be off-limits to the public. But Starkiller had no patience for diplomacy. Instead of trying to talk his way out of it, he immediately attacked the garrison stationed there, killing his way into the entrance hall of the Jedi Temple. But as soon as he made his way to the Jedi Trials Chamber, the place a Padawan goes to take their Jedi trials in the hope of becoming a true Jedi Knight, Starkiller experienced a vision, hearing his father's voice warning him that he needed to prepare for the upcoming test. While he was still trying to make sense of the vision, he was blasted by a red Force lightning attack. This surge could not have come from a Jedi or even an ordinary Sith, because it was far too powerful. Instead, it came from Darth Vader, a former Jedi Master who fell to the dark side thousands of years ago. Long ago, Vader rebelled against the Jedi Order and took on the mantle of the Sith Lord, before leading a violent war against his former comrades. His insurrection was short-lived because he fell into a trap and was killed by the Jedi Council of his time. But because the Jedi deemed him a powerful and fearsome Sith, they created a holographic simulation modeled after him to serve as a test for Padawans during their trials. The one that had just attacked Starkiller was not the genuine article, but rather a simulation that survived despite the widespread destruction all over the temple. Deathless's hologram was almost just as aggressive and fierce as the real one, wasting no time in seizing the offensive against Starkiller. But the assassin fought back well enough to use his creativity and mastery of the Force to crush it beneath the gigantic Palpatine statue. He completed his trial, the same test Padawans go through in their quest to become Jedi Knights. As soon as he defeated the memory of a long-gone Sith Lord, Starkiller received a message from his master through Proxy's own communication capabilities. Vader's sources had just located another Jedi, Kazdan Paratus, hiding in Raxus Prime. At that time, the Sith Lord was confident that Paratus was more powerful than his apprentice, believing that Starkiller's chances of survival were slim. But he assured his apprentice that defeating Paratus would mean he was growing strong enough to eventually fulfill his ultimate destiny of dethroning the Emperor. Unbeknownst to the master and pupil, Eclipse had eavesdropped on their conversation, giving her a better idea of who she was working with. Raxus Prime was a long way from Coruscant, allowing Starkiller to get to know more about his target. There was little to no information about Paratus, but what Proxy's record did indicate was that he was a secluded Jedi Master who was gifted in droid construction. He only took part in the Clone Wars to study the droids the Separatists used against the Republic. Paratus used his knowledge to construct a droid army that took the place of his clone troopers when they were killed in a fight against the Separatists. So, he only survived because there were no more clone troopers left under his command during Order 66. As soon as the trio arrived on Raxus Prime, Juno called Starkiller to the cockpit to begin their search for the Jedi Master, only for them to be surprised by the facade of a crude Jedi temple meant to imitate the one on Coruscant. It was clear to him that Paratus built this temple, prompting Starkiller to begin his search there. The rogue Shadow landed as close to the temple as possible, forcing Starkiller to traverse the dangerous junk-filled landscape leading to his target's whereabouts. But he was not alone, because Rodian salvagers fancied the planet to salvage junk parts. Starkiller remembered his master's commands of leaving no witnesses. This time, eliminating everyone was easier because he was not attacking Imperial troops. Then there was the fact that the Rodians wanted to make a quick buck out of the assassin. The Empire, after the events on Nar Shaddaa, had just issued a bounty for the mysterious attacker. Starkiller cleared his way through the scavengers before proceeding to the imitation Jedi Temple. As he ascended the temple, Starkiller saw resistance in the form of Kazdan Paratus' own droids. But this was an easy fight, for he had spent years sparring with Proxy, a more sophisticated and advanced droid. Paratus' sentries were no match for the power of the assassin, but it was too early to celebrate because Starkiller had to go up against a massive droid golem that put up a destructive fight. The battle took Starkiller into the temple's version of the Jedi Council chamber, where he saw imitation mannequins of the Jedi Council members during the Clone Wars. That was when Starkiller realized madness had taken over Paratus, for no sane Jedi would have gone through all the trouble of building an imitation Jedi temple complete with junk versions of the Jedi Council. The assassin eventually disabled the golem, which wasn't just a simple droid. Instead, there had been someone controlling it from inside. It was Kazdan Paratus himself, as the Jedi left the golem's chassis and prepared for the second round of his fight with Starkiller. Paratus was an Alina, a being not that much bigger than Jedi Master Yoda, but while Paratus may have been small, he augmented his size and mobility using a four-limbed mechanical harness on his back. He also wielded a lightsaber pike, allowing him to neutralize the height and length advantage most of his opponents had had against him. Paratus was indeed more skilled than Starkiller, deftly blocking all of his strikes with his lightsaber pike, but there was one big weakness the Sith assassin was quick to notice. His opponent had mechanical limbs, the very same reasons why Darth Vader could not use Force Lightning, the bread and butter Force power of the Sith. In Vader's case, using Force Lightning would naturally disrupt the circuits of his mechanical parts. The same applied to Paratus, as Starkiller blasted the Jedi Master with his Force Lightning, thinking the battle would end early. But unbeknownst to him, the mannequin versions of the Jedi Masters in that room were actually droids that were combat ready. They were all capable of the same fighting style as the originals they were meant to imitate, but still, they weren't even close to their skills. Still, the numbers game gave Starkiller some trouble, especially when he still had to deal with Paratus' attacks. But he fought back, destroying every Jedi mannequin. Finally, he flung the Yoda droid at Paratus. He was sad at the death of the Masters, putting him in a vulnerable situation. Starkiller realized that Paratus had gone mad in all those years of solitude. He countered every single one of Paratus' attacks, shattering his weapon and eventually crushing him under a chunk of machinery. Paratus lay dying as he felt further sorrow at his failure to protect the Jedi. He died in a brilliant flash of Force energy as Starkiller had just killed his first Jedi. Despite his success, the Sith assassin was conflicted. He was moved by Paratus' emotional display. After all, the Jedi Master's madness was not born out of malice. Instead, it was born out of his emotional trauma when he couldn't do anything to save the Jedi Temple and the Council. Still, Starkiller repressed his emotions and took off to return to his master. But before he could even think about his victory, Starkiller received another message from his master, who ordered him to return to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant for one more trial. This time, the second visit proved to be more troublesome. After his first infiltration, where he made short work of the Imperial garrison stationed there, Starkiller quickly realized security had been increased. The entrance had Imperial Senate sentinels. Meanwhile, the garrison now had snipers. Despite the improved security level, Starkiller was still too powerful for the Imperial forces to contain as he advanced into the temple. Exiting the main entrance hall, he experienced another vision of his father. This time, it warned him not to be blinded by his anger, the emotion that helped make him powerful. The assassin entered the Jedi archives, but instead of anything suspicious, it was Juno Eclipse at the end of the hall, looking like she was in pain. Worried about her, Starkiller approached her with his guard down, only for Juno to leap into the air to attack him. This was not his personal pilot. Instead, it was another holographic simulation, another Sith Lord in the form of Darth Phobos. As her name suggests, Darth Phobos fed off the phobias or fears of her enemies, using them to her advantage by assuming the forms of the things people feared the most. This skill made her a bane to both the Jedi and the Sith alike thousands of years ago. Fearing Phobos would only grow stronger, the Jedi and the Sith worked together to bring her down. Due to her ability to enter minds and tap into the things people feared the most, she made an excellent trial for Jedi Padawans. After all, a true Jedi needed to let go of their fears. Yoda said it best when he considered fear to be the path to the dark side.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
The fight with this hologram proved to be different compared to Decius. Phobos often retreated into the shadows, prompting Starkiller to fend off surprise attacks instead of being more aggressive with his offense. But as the hologram sensed defeat, it switched to a more desperate style by projecting copies of itself, and even disguising itself as Juno. At times, Starkiller hesitated, not wanting to attack a mere imitation of his ally, but he steeled his resolve, delivering a finishing blow by driving his lightsaber through Phobos' chest. While it may have been true that Starkiller overcame Phobos and his fears, the interesting aspect of that fight was the fact that Phobos took on the form of Juno in pain. It became clear that Starkiller's greatest fear was not his master, the Emperor, or even failure to fulfill his mission. Instead, deep in his core, he subconsciously feared losing Juno, even though they had not known each other for a long time. But at that time, he was yet to realize this fear or make sense of it, because he was more focused on pleasing his master and fulfilling what he thought was his ultimate destiny as a Sith. His master, however, was not yet done with him. Vader once again contacted Starkiller through proxy to inform him of a new development. While Vader congratulated him for beating Phobos, he quickly charged him with hunting down Shaak Ti on Felucia. The Sith Lord warned his apprentice that he would need the full power of the dark side if he wanted to overcome this Jedi Master's strength. Shaak Ti was not only an accomplished Jedi general during the Clone Wars, but was a leading member of the Jedi Council, making her one of the most powerful and accomplished Jedi of her time. But while he was about to face a legend, Starkiller's focus was elsewhere. As the Rogue Shadow was making its way to Felucia, the assassin stayed silent, speaking only to give orders. Throughout that time, he avoided any of Juno's attempts to converse, seemingly bothered by the fact that Phobos took the form of his pilot. But there was also something else bothering him. Starkiller had sensed emotional conflict within Juno. He eventually asked her about the disturbance he felt in her. True enough, Juno did indeed feel conflicted about everything she had done, including the bombing of Kalos, which turned a green and thriving jungle world into a dead planet with little to no life. In his efforts to calm his pilot's emotions, Starkiller merely told her that she was following her orders to the end, even if she may have felt conflicted about the effects of her actions. The assassin quickly shifted his focus to his mission as soon as the Rogue Shadow landed on an overgrown mushroom on Felucia. Starkiller made his way through the jungle, only to encounter Felucian natives who proved to be more challenging than the common stormtrooper. These inhabitants were naturally gifted in the Force and were trained in its ways by none other than the Jedi Starkiller was pursuing. As strong as these Felucians were, they were neither Sith nor Jedi, making them quick targets for the highly trained Sith assassin. As he ran deeper into the jungle, Starkiller felt something odd. He knew that Shaak Ti was powerful and intelligent, having survived for nearly 2 decades after the fall of the Jedi Order. But he also felt that the Jedi Master's activities on Felucia were disrupting the natural flow between the light and the dark side of the Force on that planet. In a way, he had every reason to believe that not even a member of the Jedi Council was in her right mind, especially when it was clear that she was leading some sort of regime on Felucia instead of simply living amongst the natives. Starkiller eventually reached the Felucian village, even going through a rancor to get there. But he noticed that the village was built on a massive living creature. It was a colossal sarlacc, far larger than any other sarlacc known to the galaxy. Known as the Ancient Abyss, it was so massive that an entire city was built between its teeth and gums. In that city awaited Starkiller's next target, Shaak Ti. As the 2 powerful Force users were about to clash, Shaak Ti remarked that Vader was a coward for sending Starkiller in his place. Undeterred by the Jedi Master's words, the assassin proceeded to attack his target. During the fight, Shaak Ti often lectured Starkiller on Jedi philosophy, but Starkiller simply brushed her words off. As he slowly gained the upper hand in the duel, Shaak Ti used the Force to influence the Sarlacc to attack. Massive tentacles emerged and started attacking Starkiller. It had become a 2-on-1 assault, with the Sarlacc constantly assaulting Starkiller, who used everything in his arsenal to fend off the massive beast and the Jedi. Despite this, his recent battles had made him one of the greatest duelists in the galaxy at this point. While fending off the Sarlacc, he managed to blast Shaak Ti with a barrage of Force lightning. The blast weakened the already tiring Jedi Master to the point that she could no longer stand. As Shaak Ti sensed her end was nearing, she stated that Starkiller was nothing more than a slave, and that the Sith had always been destined to betray each other. The assassin, however, declared his full loyalty to his master. Shortly after, the dying Jedi Master stepped back and dropped herself into the Sarlacc pit, dying in a flash of Force energy. Starkiller had defeated her. As soon as Starkiller reported back to his master, Darth Vader proclaimed that his apprentice was now strong enough. The time was nigh for him to fulfill his ultimate destiny by fighting alongside Vader to take on the Emperor together. He was ordered to return to the Executor. The words of Shaak Ti were still in his mind, but he'd never betray Vader. But unbeknownst to Starkiller, Ti was not talking about him betraying Vader. Instead, she was talking about the Master betraying the student. Chapter 5: Vader's Betrayal. Back in the Executor, after a series of grueling missions, Starkiller could not contain his happiness as he marched into Darth Vader's chambers. He was about to fulfill his life's mission, the very same purpose he thought was always meant to be his ultimate destiny. After all, he had been raised to believe he was the one to kill the Emperor and take his rightful place as a true Sith Lord, ruling alongside Vader in a new order. But Starkiller noticed that the Emperor's flagship was just outside the incomplete Executor, believing Vader had lured him into a trap. The day was nigh, he thought, the day they'd face the Emperor together. However, he was gleefully wrong. Vader corrected him, telling him that Palpatine wasn't there because he had requested him to. Instead, the Emperor's spies had followed Starkiller back to the Executor. Then, in a split second, Vader ignited his lightsaber through the Starkiller's abdomen. Sacking together, Starkiller was in complete shock, pain rushing through him, as he felt himself hanging on to stay conscious. Proxy then entered the room, showing the Emperor's hologram as he communicated through the droid. Palpatine revealed to Starkiller that Vader had forgotten his place by taking on an apprentice, and through that, violated the rule of 2. Vader's way of redeeming himself was to kill him. Starkiller couldn't believe it, and pleaded with Vader not to do it. But Vader knew that there was no way out. As Sidious watched, Vader used the Force to pick Starkiller up and started throwing him around the chamber. Finally, he threw him through the viewport into the vacuum of space, where he was supposed to die a cold and lonely death, much to the Emperor's delight. As Starkiller floated through the vacuum of space, he felt the cold vacuum of space and himself dying. But just as he was about to completely freeze to death, a ship picked him up and brought him aboard. It was the Empirical, Vader's science vessel, which had been ordered by Vader to collect Starkiller's body. Despite all the damage he suffered under his master's hands, Starkiller was still alive and barely clinging to life. As the droids aboard the Empirical started mending his wounds and equipping him with life-saving cybernetics, he saw visions and memories flooding through his mind. These were the very same memories he had repressed a long time ago. 6 months later, he awoke. Upon waking up, he felt relief now that the visions were over. But reality was worse. He was restrained on a laboratory table with Vader standing above him. As he recalled all the recent events, he felt rage. For the first time in his life, he showed true rage in front of Vader, accusing him of trying to end his life and betraying him. But Vader tried to calm his apprentice down, telling him he never tried to kill him, but only gave in to the Emperor's demands because he had no choice. Then he gave Starkiller two options: either re-enter Vader's service, or refuse and die in the laboratory that was set to self-destruct. With no other options, Starkiller hesitantly accepted the offer, returning to his master's side as his apprentice once again. But trust, once shattered, is nearly impossible to put back together. Starkiller was now slowly letting his doubts about the Sith creep into his mind. Still, he listened to his master's new plans. Vader told him that Palpatine's spies were watching his every move, and that he currently couldn't move from the Emperor's side. To that end, he needed a distraction to divert attention away from him. That was Starkiller's next purpose. So, in lieu of assassinating surviving Jedi and Imperial officers, Starkiller was given a new mission: to raise an army of rebels and dissidents to oppose the Emperor and start a galaxy-wide rebellion that could possibly allow Vader to catch Sidious off guard. Now, instead of constantly communicating with Vader, Starkiller was given the freedom to do whatever he wanted to pursue his objective. The only condition was for him to sever all ties to his past except for proxy, so that the Emperor would never trace Starkiller's new mission back to Vader. As Vader cut his transmission, it was revealed he was never there, but was merely communicating to Starkiller via Proxy's ability to mimic people. Chapter 6: A New Mission. After conversing with Starkiller as Vader, Proxy was overjoyed that Starkiller survived, as it meant he could still fulfill his goal of killing him himself. Shortly after, they hacked into the Imperial's navigation system and set it on a collision course for the nearest star, forcing the duo to make their way to the Rogue Shadow. But Starkiller quickly asked about Juno's whereabouts, to which Proxy responded that she was alive on board, being held as a traitor for her association with Starkiller. Then, as the duo met Imperial troops along the way, Starkiller drew his lightsaber, quickly realizing that he was wielding the very same weapon he retrieved from Ram Koda after blinding and defeating the Jedi Master. Whatever the case, they quickly went to Juno's cell to rescue her, even as Proxy cautioned Starkiller that he was going against Vader's order to sever his ties with the past. But the assassin didn't care because he needed Juno. Subconsciously, he also wanted her around, especially after spending so much time together with her during the missions. Starkiller reached Juno to rescue her, obtaining her assurance that she would leave the Empire behind while continuing to work with him. With Juno agreeing to go against the Empire, Starkiller was able to keep her in the dark about his continued alliance with Vader, even though he was already harboring doubts about his master's plan for him. With Juno back in the fold, the trio escaped the Imperial before its destruction as she skillfully flew the Rogue Shadow out of danger. Starkiller, meanwhile, gave Juno the freedom to choose their destination after telling her about his plan of rounding up allies against the Empire. But there was also something else he told Juno. He wanted to find a teacher to show him the aspects of the Force that Darth Vader kept from him. While Vader told him that the dark side was always going to be with him before they parted ways, Starkiller's visions and doubts prompted him to seek the other side of the Force, the light. To that end, the crew decided to find Ram Koda, knowing he had survived his duel with Starkiller. The search for Koda took the crew on a trip back to Nar Shaddaa before going to the ancient Sith world Ziost. Finally, they discovered his last known location on the planet Bespin, where he had retreated as a depressed and drunk old man. Ram Koda was a shadow of his former self. The once great Jedi and military genius had resorted to drinking his sorrows down to the last drop of alcohol. His blindness not only took his sight, but also his connection with the Force, leading him to a life of misery and hopelessness. But after realizing that the Empire had also found Koda's location and was about to send one of their most dangerous agents after him, the Rogue Shadow crew rushed to Bespin, reaching Koda before the Empire did. He found him in a cantina, and he approached the blind man by masquerading as a Jedi. Koda didn't seem to recognize him through the Force, but also proved to be very drunk and uncooperative. And not too long after, they found themselves in danger when a local stormtrooper garrison attacked. For the first time, Starkiller fought the Empire as if they were truly his enemies, instead of simply wiping out witnesses to his assassinations. But while Kota hid under a table, Starkiller struggled with keeping up with his disguise as a Jedi because he needed to ensure that innocent bystanders were not harmed in order to gain Kota's trust. So, in a short time, he went from killing witnesses to protecting civilians. Starkiller also struggled in his escape from the Empire because he had to drag a drunk old man along. Kota was uncooperative the whole time, often trying to escape on his own to get away from the unknown Jedi dragging him out of hiding. Things got worse when Starkiller faced an Imperial Shadow Guard and was too distracted to realize Kota was already escaping. With no choice, the former Sith assassin dropped the act and used the dark side to quickly defeat his opponent before Kota could make himself scarce, or, in the worst case scenario, get himself killed. As Starkiller began his search for Kota, he wondered about the Shadow Guard's identity before realizing it couldn't have been one of Vader's secret warriors. Instead, it was most likely affiliated with Palpatine. Another one came, giving him more trouble than the first before eventually overpowering him. But it soon got tougher because as soon as he got to the dock where he would meet up with the rogue Shadow, the area was filled with Imperial troops, including 2 more Shadow Guardsmen. The incredibly tough battle forced Starkiller to fight on pure reflex, deepening his connection with the Force as he thrashed his enemies around like ragdolls. And as soon as he destroyed every single one of his enemies, that was when Ram Kota appeared, not as a drunk old man, but as an unimpressed Jedi who thought the young Starkiller was skilled, but not yet strong enough to dent the Emperor's army. Circumstances were different this time compared to when they first met. This time, Starkiller appealed to Kota's sense of honor to reason with him. The old Jedi finally agreed to join him, revealing he had been in contact with an old friend in the Imperial Senate looking to go against the Empire. However, Starkiller's improved connection with the Force after his skirmish with the Empire on Bespin proved to be crucial. He felt the Jedi Temple on Coruscant calling for him, as he believed he needed to return there for a third time to face one more test. Chapter 7. Final Trial. Even though this was Starkiller's third time visiting the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, the third time was not the charm for the Imperial garrison stationed there. Though their forces were now reinforced with more troops and skilled soldiers, the Imperials didn't stand a chance against the rogue assassin. Starkiller cut through the Imperial forces before entering the Jedi Temple and realizing there was a path that led to a lower-level tunnel. The tunnel led to one of the top towers of the Jedi Temple and brought him to the old Jedi Council chamber. But as soon as he entered the chamber, he saw a vision of his master dueling a Jedi who was unknown to him at the time. It was the duel between Vader and Galen Marek. However, things were different in that vision because Galen defeated the Dark Lord. Still unaware of this Jedi's identity, Starkiller came to his master's aid, believing the vision to be real, and that Vader was in actual danger. But the Jedi attempted to talk some sense into Starkiller, encouraging him to turn away from the dark side of the Force. The young apprentice, however, said that the dark side was all that was left of him. Thus ensued a duel between Starkiller and Galen, with the younger Force user using his raw power to defeat the Jedi. Starkiller stabbed Galen through the abdomen as the older fighter apologized to him before vanishing. It was right then and there that some of his memories came back to him. Starkiller had just killed his father in that vision. This was no longer an ordinary trial for him. Instead, it had become a mission to learn more about his father. Starkiller had the rogue Shadow bring him to one of the other spires on the Jedi Temple, where he fought Imperials once more before reaching the Holocron Vault. This was the part of the Jedi Temple where they stored data about the Jedi on information storage devices called holocrons, and only those who could use the Force gain access to the information in these devices. As Starkiller approached the main holocron, he activated a message left by his father, telling him his destiny was his own, and that he needed to complete all the Jedi trials. At that point in his life, Starkiller had never lived life on his own terms. He was simply following orders from his master. But, urged by his father's memory, he decided to finally take the final trial and fell into another Force vision that forced him into a fight with a mysterious duelist. This Dark Spectre didn't hesitate to engage him in a lightsaber duel. Starkiller managed to knock his enemy's helmet off, revealing to him that he had been fighting his own self. But this version of him was pale and twisted, a much darker Starkiller that had completely fallen into the dark side. Shocked by the revelation, Starkiller hesitated, allowing his enemy to drive him to a lower level within the labyrinth of his own mind. The fight was brutal and tough, but Starkiller overcame this much darker version of himself by finding an opening and driving his lightsaber through his opponent's back. However, as he woke up from that vision, he realized that his left hand had become similar to the clawed version of the Dark Warrior's arm, which made him realize that he would never escape the darkness within himself. He returned to the Rogue Shadow to try to discuss with Coda what he experienced in the temple, but the old Jedi, still stubborn and directionless, ended the conversation by telling him that it was none of his business. Chapter 8: The Homecoming. While it was true that Ram Koda was no longer the Jedi Starkiller fought in Nar Shaddaa, the old man was still useful. He had been communicating with his contact in the Senate, eventually learning they need to go to Kashyyyk. Koda's contact assured him that if they retrieved what he wanted, he would give him his full support in their mission to oppose the Empire. The Rogue Shadow crew made its way to this once verdant planet, only to realize that the Empire had ravaged Kashyyyk's landscape by building a skyhook, which was meant to shuttle Wookiee slaves to Imperial starships. While Starkiller was yet to recall that this was not the first time he had been on this planet, this was not the Kashyyyk he once knew a long time ago. At that time, however, everything seemed new to him because he didn't know that this place was the one he once called home. Starkiller made his way through the forest in this effort to find what Koda's contact wanted him to retrieve. As soon as he got a better look at the skyhook from the ground level, he was struck by how it resembled one of the things he saw in his visions when Vader's droids were reconstructing him on the Imperial. He couldn't make sense of it because he had yet to remember that he had been to Kashyyyk before. Using subtlety in this mission, Starkiller used a mind trick on some of the troopers he encountered. He learned about an Imperial base that had a guest in the lodge at the center. This time, there was no longer a need to be subtle with his approach, as he attacked the base and defeated a contingent of stormtroopers, including an AT-ST. He made his way into the main lodge to search for the item Koda's contact wanted. After an extensive search, he couldn't find anything he thought was valuable enough for the contact to give them such a dangerous mission. In his search, however, he met a civilian, the mysterious guest he had found out about earlier. Starkiller came face to face with Alderaan's princess, Leia Organa, a scene that oddly matched one of the visions he had on the Imperial. Initially, however, the princess wasn't too friendly with Starkiller, believing him to be one of the Emperor's assassins while dismissing the possibility of him being Ram Koda's ally. As far as Leia was concerned, Koda died on Nar Shaddaa. Leia also mentioned her father, Senator Bail Organa. Starkiller quickly deduced that Organa was Koda's contact in the Senate, feeding him information about Imperial targets. It turned out that Leia was being held hostage on Kashyyyk because the Empire knew that Senator Organa already had doubts about Imperial rule. They were afraid of him speaking out against the Empire and inspiring other systems to rise up against the Imperial tyrannical rule. So, they used Leia as a bargaining chip against the Senator. As the meet and greet progressed, Starkiller convinced Leia that Koda had survived and that he had been charged to retrieve her. Leia agreed to go with the plan under one condition, that Starkiller would destroy the skyhook before it could be used to shuttle the Wookiees out of Kashyyyk. Charged with the destruction of this Imperial contraption, Starkiller proceeded with the plan while Leia stole a shuttle that allowed her to leave the planet. Meanwhile, Starkiller took a tube down the cliff to reach the forest below. Not too long after, he found an old hut surrounded by a dark presence in the Force. Koda communicated his concerns to Starkiller, telling him to leave the ruined hut alone. But this darkness in the Force kept on calling to him, making him curious as to what had caused such a disturbance. There, he found evidence of a lightsaber duel, with burned slash marks on the walls. Starkiller also found a small blue crystal on the floor. Upon picking it up, he experienced a strong Force vision, where he saw Vader killing his father and abducting the young, orphaned version of himself from his home. Then, the vision took him to a different scene, where he was forced into a contest with himself. This time, it was different from what he experienced on Coruscant. He was the Sith warrior, and his enemy was the Jedi version of himself. In what was a brutal duel, the Sith version triumphed by ultimately stabbing the Jedi through the heart. Starkiller soon snapped out of the vision and was back in the hut, with the ghost of his father apologizing for all that had happened to him. For the first time in many years, Starkiller heard his father calling him by his birth name, Galen. The young man formerly known as Darth Vader's secret Sith assassin remembered that he was Galen Marek. While the discovery of his origins did indeed shock him to his core, he left the hut as a different person from the one who entered it. Still, he needed to be Starkiller to achieve his goal of destroying the Skyhook. He used the structure's moorings using the Force, throwing TIE fighters into them. But when he was about to deal the final blow to the structure, Ozzik Stern, the captain of the Imperial troops on that planet, confronted Marek in a heavily modified all-terrain Kashyyyk transport. It was the very same machine he used to hunt the Wookiees down. But because the AT-KT wasn't built to handle Force lightning, Starkiller made quick work of the captain. He eventually destroyed the Skyhook seconds later, completing his mission on Kashyyyk. However, Galen wasn't too happy after this successful mission. He was angry at Coda for withholding information about Organa being his contact. The Jedi General admitted that Organa was indeed his contact, and that the Senator had tried to recruit him to rescue his daughter. But because of Coda's condition, he wasn't fit to rescue Leia. So instead, Organa went to Felucia to seek Shaak Ti's help and had yet to make contact with them, unaware that Starkiller had already killed her. For now, he thought it to be better to keep Shaak Ti's death to himself. As soon as the conversation ended, Marek tried to find solace alone before Juno approached him. She wanted to know what was bothering him. At this point, she could tell when he was deeply in thought. Starkiller refrained from opening up, but offered to take over piloting duties for their trip to Felucia to give Juno time to rest. Chapter 9. Gathering Allies. On the way to Felucia, Starkiller did some digging on Bail Organa and realized that there was something oddly familiar about the Senator, though he wasn't sure what it was. Still, he focused on the mission of finding Organa, dead or alive. This time, however, the Empire was also on Felucia, unlike the last time when Marek only had to deal with the locals. They found Organa's shuttle, but the Senator was gone. Juno, having felt unease for some time now, used the opportunity to raise the issue about the possibility of Rom Koda finding out about their former allegiance to Darth Vader. The dark side in Starkiller came out once again, assuring Juno that they would kill the old Jedi if ever he were to find out about their continued allegiance to the Empire. As Juno's worries intensified, Starkiller diverted the matter to their mission of convincing Organa he was sincere with his intentions of forming a rebel army against the Empire. He realized convincing the Senator was going to be much harder than convincing a blind and drunk Coda and a teenage Leia. But as he made his way through the jungle, Marek was surprised that Felucia had shifted more toward the dark side after Shaak Ti's death. Though he had spent most of his life immersed in the darkness, Starkiller felt uncomfortable about the planet's dark side. The planet's various dangerous creatures and harsh terrain made him reflect on the true nature of the dark side and how it was probably impossible for nature to have complete harmony, concluding that the conflict between the two sides was what the dark side fed on. He made his way back to where he last encountered Shaak Ti, only to find out that the Empire had taken over the Felucian village and restrained the massive Sarlacc. Any surviving Felucian hid deep in the ancient abyss to take refuge against the Empire. But as he felt a deeper connection to the dark side, Starkiller traveled north from the Sarlacc toward the Rancor graveyard. As he searched the graveyard, he realized that he had never met Bail Organa before. Instead, the familiarity with the Senator came from the Force visions he had when he was dying. This was the very same reason why he was familiar with Leia, but he also felt a stronger concentration of darkness as he dove deeper in his search for Organa. He eventually found the Senator and freed him, explaining that he was allied with Rom Koda, but the Senator told him that Maris Brood, Shaak Ti's former apprentice, had gone mad and fallen to the dark side, keeping him on Felucia in the hopes of trading him to the Empire in exchange for leaving them alone. She was the darkness Marek felt on that planet, and the very same reason why Felucia was now leaning more toward the dark side, unable to regain its balance. But before Starkiller could escape with Organa, Brood arrived on her Rancor. She was once more a familiar face because Starkiller had seen her in one of his visions as well. In the ensuing battle, Marek managed to defeat the Rancor by attacking from the inside, forcing Brood to fight her one-on-one. Starkiller was on the defensive, parrying and blocking every one of Brood's raw and aggressive attacks. As he was defending himself, the Sith apprentice came to the conclusion that they were very similar. He thought that if Brood had succumbed to the dark side so easily, she could also turn back to the light side as quickly. This was one of the things he learned from his previous duel with Shaak Ti, who told him that the Force was fluid and that light and dark were but mere directions. He also came to the conclusion that fighting Maris Brood didn't mean he was turning his back on the dark side. Instead, he was merely fighting her because she was in his way. With that thought in mind, Starkiller quickly changed tactics, going on the offensive using the more aggressive Juyo form to break Brood's concentration. Starkiller eventually overpowered her, using the Force to slam her into the ground so badly that she had to surrender. Brood, however, asked for mercy, telling Marek she would turn back from the dark side if he were to spare her life. Starkiller was skeptical at first because he saw that Brood's skills were not worthy of the dark side, focusing more on survival rather than power. He let her go, though Organa thought doing so was a bad idea because she reminded him so much of a fallen Jedi he once knew. Unbeknownst to Marek, the Senator was talking about Darth Vader himself. Despite Organa's disapproval, Starkiller asserted she was never going to be truly free because the ghost of her actions would continue to haunt her. Back on the Rogue Shadow, Organa told Coda that an open rebellion was too dangerous at the moment, and that they needed to show potential allies that the Empire had weaknesses they could exploit. Disappointed by the Senator's refusal to rebel, Starkiller agreed to meditate on how to best find a vulnerability within the Empire, to convince possible rebels that there was hope. But he never meditated. Instead, he sent a message to Darth Vader for the first time since their last encounter, asking his master about such a targeted weakness they could exploit. As he was waiting for his master's response, Starkiller evaded a surprise attack from Proxy, who was using the Anakin Skywalker module. Unfazed because he had already beaten skilled Jedi Masters, Marek easily defeated Proxy. At that moment, Vader's response arrived, turning the Anakin version of Proxy into a hologram of the Sith Lord himself. Vader was satisfied with his apprentice's progress and told him that the best target would be a newly constructed Star Destroyer shipyard on Raxus Prime. But after giving him his newest target, the Dark Lord admonished Starkiller for developing emotional attachments to his new allies, reminding him where his true allegiance belonged. As the transmission ended, Proxy returned to his usual self, telling his master that he always hated being Vader, to which Starkiller replied that Vader probably also hated being himself as well. But what they didn't know was that Juno had been around the entire time, listening in on the conversation. She was angry that Starkiller was still loyal to his master after everything they've been through. However, she also believed that Marek was still the key to a future rebellion, believing that the fate of their budding rebel force was in his hands and not in Vader's. She also asked him not to force her to leave behind this life she had grown to love, having already lost the life she had when she was with the Imperial Navy. Marek gave serious thought to what Juno told him, conflicted about walking his own path or simply following the one his Dark Master had laid before him. So, after their conversation, he replaced the crystal in his lightsaber with the very same blue one he found in his family's home on Kashyyyk. The crystal turned his saber's blade blue, not only signifying that this was truly his own lightsaber, but also that he was already having misgivings about his allegiance to Vader. Meanwhile, Juno and Proxy told the rest of their crew of the plan on using the Empire's colossal ore cannon on Raxus Prime to destroy the Imperial Star Destroyer shipyard. But as Starkiller prepared to depart to take on this mission, Coda asked if there were any news on Kazdan Paratus, who he knew hid on that planet. Juno told him there were no updates on the former Jedi Master, with Starkiller showing sympathy, unable to tell everyone that he ended Paratus' life a while back. But as he progressed through his mission on Raxus Prime, Starkiller couldn't shake off the thoughts of wanting to spend his life with Juno. He was distracted by the idea of being with her, only to receive a message from Juno telling him that Drexel Roush, a dangerous Rodian scavenger, was somewhere in the area, together with his gang. Disappointed in himself for losing focus, Starkiller paid more attention to the mission before fighting off an ambush from the Rodian scavengers. They were angry at him for bringing the Empire to the planet after defeating Paratus and his droids, who were the only reasons why the Imperials couldn't easily take over Raxus Prime. But while Marek tried to reason with the scavengers, the gang opened fire on him, forcing him to go on the offensive. Roush tried escaping with his jetpack, however, Starkiller knew he was a liability, because the Rodian gang leader knew of the apprentice's involvement in Paratus' death. He redirected Roush's flight path, killing the Rodian. After defeating Roush's gang, Starkiller began plotting a plan of attack as he was nearing the ore cannon. That was when he pondered on the limits of his powers, realizing that he simply knew how to kill and destroy. Unlike the Jedi, his mastery over the Force was basic and crude because he didn't know any higher levels of mastery. This made him understand that it was impossible to rule the galaxy with brute force alone, and that the only reason the Emperor and Vader were powerful was because they used the galaxy's fear to their advantage. Just as he neared his destination with the cannon, Starkiller fended off an ambush by a shadow guard. But this guardsman was different from the one he had fought before. Instead, it was Proxy disguised as one, as the droid had judged that Starkiller had grown to become vulnerable, often losing himself to his thoughts and doubting his destiny. The droid's primary objective had always been to kill Starkiller because that was Vader's way of keeping the apprentice sharp and strong. However, with Marek now confused about his actions, Proxy believed he could finally defeat his master, often switching from one module to another. Starkiller easily defended himself, having defeated every module Proxy used. However, the droid had a trump card, one he had kept hidden until the time was right. He transformed into the Sith Lord Darth Maul, a powerful Dathomirian Zabrak once regarded by Darth Sidious as a worthy apprentice. But despite the droid's best efforts, not even Maul's fighting style was a match for Starkiller's raw power. The Force Adept disarmed the droid, who almost fell from the platform. Starkiller's attachment to his longtime friend, however, forced him to grab onto Proxy's lightsaber hilts to pull him back up. But shortly after doing so, he disarmed the droid and pinned it against a pipe with Proxy's own lightsabers. With Proxy defeated, Starkiller proceeded to complete his mission. He overloaded the cannon's railgun tracks to redirect its fire to the shipyard, destroying it. But one of the Star Destroyers survived the explosion, and was about to crash to the surface of Raxus Prime, directly at the ore cannon where he was standing. Knowing he didn't have enough time to escape the impact, Coda advised him to use the Force to control the massive ship's landing. Starkiller had never done something so crazy before. Pulling apart Imperial walkers using the Force was already challenging enough. But controlling a ship of this size was an entirely different challenge he initially considered impossible. However, he was reminded of the fact that size and mass were nothing compared to the Force. To that end, he attempted to do the impossible, focusing his entire strength on the falling ship. As he pulled the Star Destroyer down, he was overwhelmed by the scale of the task. He initially tried to draw power from his identity as Galen Marek, but that proved to be futile. Then, slowly becoming desperate, he allowed Juno to surround his thoughts. Starkiller drew strength from the image of her. With that, he managed to guide the falling Star Destroyer into the surface in front of him. As it crashed, a bunch of rubble and the destroyer itself kept sliding at him through the surface. It was chaos. However, having slowed the fall, Starkiller eventually managed to escape the crash site unharmed. As he regained his composure, he heard a disturbance. It was Proxy. The droid not only survived their duel, but also the Star Destroyer crash. But the damage burned out some of Proxy's primary programming, which meant that the droid's guiding programming of killing Starkiller was no longer in effect. Proxy, however, felt that the damage had rendered him useless, and asked his longtime master to leave him behind. Marek had grown attached to his droid, refusing to leave him alone. To him, Proxy was no longer just a training droid, but was a friend, the longest companion he had ever had. His attachment to the droid proved to be the reason he could never abandon Proxy, useful or not. More importantly, the destruction of the Star Destroyer shipyard made the Empire look vulnerable for the first time since its inception. Word of what happened on Raxus Prime began to spread, reaching key areas all over the galaxy. With that victory, Coda managed to set up a meeting with Garm Bel Iblis of Corellia on Cloud City to discuss a possible alliance with Starkiller. Bel Iblis was one of Palpatine's biggest critics in the Senate, and his resources would have been invaluable to the budding rebellion. The rogue Shadow crew returned to Cloud City for the first time since rescuing Rom Coda from alcoholism. But when they got there, they learned that it had been overrun by criminals led by the Mandalorian Chopa Notimo. The chief administrator told them that Garm Bel Iblis had left to try to negotiate with the criminals. As such, Coda suggested that Starkiller confront the Mandalorian to prove his worth as a possible ally for the rebellion. Starkiller blasted his way through mercenaries and Mandalorians alike before learning that Bel Iblis had been captured by a Gungan named Cleef, one of Chopa's underlings. So, knowing that the Senate was vital to his plans, Marek had no choice but to make Bel Iblis' survival his top priority. He made his way to Cleef's location, learning that the Gungan had given the senator to Chopa. Starkiller made quick work of the mercenary, even though Cleef showed impressive skills as a swordsman. After that, he contacted Juno, telling her to ready the rogue shadow for launch in case he needed a quick exit. Not too long later, he came face to face with the criminal leader. Believing Marek to be a Jedi, Choppa was happy to battle such a worthy warrior. After all, the Mandalorians are known to be proud warriors who relish in fighting the best. But despite the Mandalorian's best efforts, he was no match for Starkiller's Sith training. With Choppa defeated, Starkiller approached Beliblis, having already proven his worth as a possible ally. He suggested the idea of mounting a rebellion against the Empire. Thankful for rescuing his life, Beliblis agreed and assured his savior that he would contact Ramkota as soon as they were ready. Chapter 10: Vader's Return. With Garm Beliblis in the fold, the rebels now had more supporters than the Senate. Organa, meanwhile, informed Starkiller that he was going to be meeting with Beliblis and Mon Mothma, another one of the Empire's more outspoken enemies in the Senate. The meeting took place at Cantham House on Coruscant, but although the meetings were going well, Starkiller couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were now at a dangerous level, especially with more high-profile resistance leaders joining their cause. While the meeting was going on, Starkiller passed the time by sparring with Kota, who peppered him with questions about his past. But the secret Sith apprentice dodged every one of them, not wanting Kota to learn more about his affiliation with Vader. Not too long later, his master finally contacted him, with Juno witnessing the exchange of information between the two. Starkiller informed Vader that all the pieces were falling into place, and that the rebels were yet to completely trust him. He cautioned his master that if the rebels were to discover them communicating, or if they learned anything about his past, their mission would be a failure. But the Dark Lord asserted that he needed to contact him soon. Juno, of course, had some questions about what had transpired, asking Marek about Vader's true intentions. Starkiller simply assured her that Vader wouldn't intervene in the mission, even if he harbored doubts about the apprentice's true allegiance. Ending the conversation, Marek told Juno he was doing what he thought was right for both of them. Upon the conclusion of the meeting on Coruscant, the rogue Shadow crew received word from Organa to travel to Corellia to meet with the leaders. There, they established the rebellion's command structure. Organa's wealth would fund the rebels. Beliblis would provide the military hardware. Meanwhile, Mothma would supply the needed soldiers. At the top of it all was Starkiller as the rebellion's leader and figurehead because of his connection to the Force. Suddenly, Ramkota appeared all clean and sobered up, declaring that he would also be fighting for the rebellion. This meeting became known as the Corellian Treaty, with the rebellion against the Empire firmly established. But as soon as the Corellian Treaty concluded, the Imperial military attacked. Vader spearheaded the assault, marching into the chamber to order his troopers to take the rebels alive, so that the Emperor could execute them personally. Kota was the only one brave enough to resist, drawing his lightsaber and attacking Vader, only for the Sith Lord to toss him aside like a rag doll. With Kota down, Vader approached Starkiller, congratulating him for his performance. He revealed to everyone that Marek had been his secret apprentice all along, shocking the rebels who felt betrayed. However, as much as Vader was impressed with his apprentice's help in rounding up the rebels, he also knew that Starkiller already had doubts about his true allegiance. Without any further words, he lifted the rounded table up with the Force and threw it at the perplexed Starkiller. Starkiller survived the impact and angrily got up to confront his master. Starkiller questioned Vader's interference in the mission. That was when the Dark Lord revealed that he had lied from the very beginning. The revelation shocked Starkiller, realizing that the very beginning Vader talked about led all the way to his childhood, when the Sith Lord took him in as his secret apprentice. His life had been a lie the entire time. Accepting the fact that Vader never intended to overthrow the Emperor. Vader confirmed this, though he explained that he specifically never wanted Starkiller to be the one to dethrone Palpatine. As Vader tossed him to the edge of a cliff, the former Starkiller believed that he deserved to die for plotting to use the rebels for his own selfish ends. This was the cycle of the dark side, and he had never been in control. The Dark Lord advanced, ready to kill the boy he personally raised in secret. Defiant until the very end, Marek told the Sith Lord that he would never be free without him. But just as Vader was about to deal the final blow, Obi-Wan Kenobi attacked the Sith Lord. Caught off guard because he had just seen a shadow of his past, Vader fought Kenobi, eventually defeating him to reveal that this was Proxy all along. But in the middle of the fight between Vader and Proxy, Starkiller lost his grip of the cliff ledge and fell to the bottom. Vader destroyed Proxy and looked off the edge, assuming Starkiller had been killed and left the scene. Unbeknownst to Vader, though, Starkiller had survived the fall. Juno, aboard the Rogue Shadow, arrived just in time to find Starkiller barely clinging on to consciousness. As Juno helped him aboard the ship, he eventually revealed to her his birth name, Galen Marek. She became the first to know his real identity outside of the Starkiller codename Vader gave him years ago. To that end, the former apprentice wanted Juno to know him as Marek and not as the lie called Starkiller. Chapter 11, Last Stand. After Vader's latest betrayal, the former apprentice refused to be called Starkiller. Instead, he reclaimed the name Galen Marek, and for the first time, he was no longer a Sith, because he proclaimed himself a Jedi like his father before him. Armed with his renewed resolve, Marek decided to save the rebels by tracking both Vader and the Senators. In his hope of doing so, he entered into a deep meditative state in an attempt to provoke a Force vision that would help him find where Vader had taken the rebels. While he was successful, he saw multiple visions of the future, almost getting overwhelmed by what he saw. But instead of looking at all the possible scenarios, he focused on the common elements to discover the location of the rebels. They were on board the incomplete Death Star in the Horus system. With Galen about to embark on what would be the greatest and most meaningful mission of his life, he and Juno exchanged their last words, with Juno wondering whether or not he would survive. Marek didn't mince his words. There was a chance he would die in that rescue attempt. Knowing this was quite possibly her final moment with Galen, Juno rushed forward to kiss him on the lips in a show of affection. Initially surprised by Juno's action, Galen returned the embrace, eventually parting ways after their first and last kiss as the reformed Jedi prepared to enter the massive Death Star. One of the first things he did in the Death Star was to mount a revolt, freeing Wookiee slaves to keep the Imperial troops occupied while he tried to find the location of the rebels within the massive superstructure. He eventually recruited some of the Wookiees to guide him to the Emperor's location, considering these slaves knew more about the Death Star than the soldiers. Marek followed the Wookiees' instructions, allowing him to get closer to the Emperor's observation dome. Though he had to fight off a shadow guard reinforced by 4 red guards, the former Sith assassin succeeded in reaching the Emperor's location. But as soon as he charged along the corridor leading to the observation dome, he was greeted by a familiar dark entity in the form of his former master. Igniting his lightsaber, Darth Vader acknowledged that Galen had become strong in the Force because of his training. But he also declared that he still had much to learn, believing Marek was not yet strong enough to beat him. Reinforced by his newfound allegiance to the light side of the Force, Marek countered by saying that Vader had nothing left to teach him. The Dark Lord quickly overwhelmed his former apprentice with powerful strikes that made Marek realize he was now fighting a much stronger opponent compared to any of the Jedi and Sith holograms he faced. Though he felt the impact of Vader's attacks through his body, Galen found his composure and mounted a counterattack that made the Sith Lord rethink his plan of attack. At that moment, Marek realized that this was the first time he had fought his former master as an equal. Before that moment, Vader often held back because his former apprentice had yet to reach his level. But in that final duel, no one was holding back, as the former Starkiller was seemingly just as strong as the man who taught him the essence of the dark side. The battle went back and forth, with the combatants eventually landing in the throne room, where Palpatine and the senators watched. Galen started mocking his former master by telling him that he himself had broken free of his control. On the other hand, Vader was yet to break free from Darth Sidious's hold over him. To that end, it was as if Marek was telling Vader that he had surpassed him because he had the strength and willpower to follow his own path, whereas the cyborg Sith Lord was too weak to separate himself from his own master, Darth Sidious. These words enraged Vader, who drew more power from the dark side to intensify his attacks. But this played right into Galen's hands, as he started using Ceresu, the very lightsaber form Vader struggled against when he fought Obi-Wan Kenobi in the past, which worked almost perfectly against the Dark Lord's flurry of offense. And as soon as he found an opening, Galen blasted Vader with Force Lightning, putting his former mentor onto the defensive for the first time in that fight. With the Dark Lord vulnerable, Marek threw everything he had at Vader and managed to slice off part of his throat armor as well as most of his mask and helmet. He had just beaten his former master. As Vader kneeled there defeated, Galen contemplated whether or not he should finish his former master off once and for all. But then Marek saw that Vader was not an intimidating figure after all. Instead, he was a sad old man with eyes full of pain and exhaustion. He couldn't finish off someone in such a state, even if Vader never hesitated to betray him. He was a Jedi now. As Galen was still contemplating, Palpatine approached him to congratulate the Jedi for his victory. True to his nature as an insidious and conniving Sith Lord, Darth Sidious used the opportunity to pull Marek back to the dark side, offering Galen to replace Vader at his side. The Emperor's offer was too good to pass up. Marek hesitated because a part of him wanted to be the hope the rebels wanted, but at the same time, he still wanted revenge on Vader for what he did to him and his father. The conflict brewed within Galen, making it more difficult for him to decide his destiny. Ram Kota, sensing the conflict within Marek, intervened by snatching Palpatine's lightsaber with the Force before rushing the powerful Sith Lord himself. But Palpatine easily defeated the blind Jedi by blasting him with Force lightning. Bail Organa then tried to appeal to Marek's sense of good and help Kota. Seeing Kota and Bail there and the violence of the Emperor, Marek realized he didn't want to go back to the dark and violent past he once lived in when he believed he was the ultimate Sith warrior. He came to understand that killing Vader would not change anything, whereas the rebels could change the fate of the entire galaxy for the better. With that, he had made his decision, resisting the urge to kill Vader and refuting the Emperor. With that, Galen proceeded to attack the Emperor, who managed to pull his lightsaber out at the last second to block Galen's attack. True to Darth Vader's estimation of Marek's potential, the young Jedi was indeed Palpatine's equal in the Force. No one gained an edge in that duel, with Galen matching Sidious's abilities in the Force and lightsaber combat. As the fight raged on, Palpatine started revealing to Galen that he was never a secret apprentice. Instead, everything was according to the Emperor's plans, claiming to have been the one who ordered his abduction from Kashyyyk. Vader was nothing more than a proxy master because Sidious was Galen's true master the entire time. But the revelation only enraged and strengthened Marek. In a surge of power, he managed to overwhelm Palpatine and threw him against the ceiling of the Death Star with a powerful Force blast. Palpatine dropped to the floor, laying there. Galen took the opportunity to toss his comlink to the rebels so that they could contact Juno to pick them up while he dealt with the Emperor himself. Then he advanced on Sidious, who was getting on his knees. As Galen advanced slowly, Sidious declared that it was Marek's destiny to destroy him by giving in to his hatred, so that he may take his place as the next Dark Lord of the Sith. But instead of killing the Emperor, Galen extinguished his lightsaber, deciding to do what was right, no matter how much he wanted to destroy the Sith right then and there. As the rogue shadow landed nearby, Galen told Kota to get everyone aboard. The Emperor, however, still had some fight left in him, blasting the Jedi General with Force lightning. Not wanting to see Kota suffering because he had become more of a master to him than Vader or Sidious, Marek took the brunt of the attack himself. This was the most painful thing he had ever experienced in his life. It was as if a star was igniting within his chest, causing so much pain and suffering. The sheer power of Palpatine's Force lightning was worse than anything he had ever endured from Vader's brutal training. Somehow, he found the strength to overcome the pain, absorb the energy, and redirect it to the powerful Sith Lord. With no other option left because Vader had regained his strength and was now pursuing the rebels, Galen grabbed Palpatine by the shoulders and redirected the Emperor's attack, forcing the Sith Lord to feel the full strength of his own power. At that moment, Marek was driven by the desire to save his friends. So, in one final show of power, he embraced the Force completely and released all of the energy inside him, resulting in a massive shockwave that devastated the entire throne room, knocking all combatants back. In the aftermath, Galen laid on the ground of the throne room. He could feel all life leaving his body. He then focused his thoughts on Juno, saddened that they couldn't spend the rest of their life together. As his consciousness faded, he whispered his birth name one last time, before death finally took him. His final act of bravery was more than enough for the Force to deem him worthy, and Galen Marek's spirit became one with the Force. Chapter 12, Epilogue. Galen Marek was dead. Palpatine and Vader, meanwhile, survived the powerful blast and rappelled themselves up. Palpatine was most displeased. Not only did he lose a potential ally who could have surpassed him, but he also had to be burdened with a diminished Darth Vader staying by his side as an inferior disciple. He also had to worry about the rebels' plans of mounting a full-scale revolt against his empire. So, in a way, the rebellion was a product of the Sith Lord's machinations from the very start. By manipulating Galen into rounding up the rebels, they inadvertently sealed their own fate later down the line. But that wasn't all that Marek did. His duel with Sidious drove a wedge between the Sith Lords. Vader now realized his master wanted to replace him all along, prompting him to truly find a powerful apprentice to take Sidious down. Galen was essentially the reason Vader desired to overthrow his master, something he had never given any serious thought to in the past, even while he was training Marek as his apprentice. Meanwhile, the rebels, inspired by Galen's martyrdom, launch a full rebellion against the Empire. Juno and Bail eventually return to Corellia to recover Proxy from the snow. The droid, although damaged, was repaired and revealed that Marek had told him that he would be in charge of protecting Juno in case anything were to happen to him. Immediately after that, they met up with the other rebel leaders on Kashyyyk, using the Marek's family crest as the Rebel Alliance's symbol of hope. While the galaxy went on to forget Galen Marek and his sacrifice, the rebels and their successors in the future continued to use this symbol without knowing that they were honoring one of the greatest heroes the galaxy had ever known. Finally, Juno asked Kota if he knew all along that the same assassin who blinded him was the very same one who created the Rebel Alliance. The blind Jedi revealed that he had always known the truth about Galen Marek, and that despite the dark thoughts clouding the former Sith assassin's mind, he knew that the only reason he never fully gave in to the darkness was Juno herself. Chapter 13. The Clone. 6 months after Galen's death on the Death Star, Vader brought his body to Kamino. Vader still desired an apprentice, and wanted to clone his former apprentice into a more obedient and powerful version. After several failed attempts, the clone called Subject 1138 was eventually stable, and even more powerful than the original Galen Marek. Unfortunately for Vader, though, the clone inherited a lot of Marek's memories. As the clone had feelings for Juno resurfacing, he eventually escaped Kamino and took on the Starkiller moniker, because he refused to be called by his template's real name. Despite wanting to be different from Marek, the new Starkiller retained the same feelings he had for Juno Eclipse, prompting him on a quest to find her. The new Starkiller eventually found out that Vader had captured Juno. After confronting the Dark Lord, the clone defeated Vader and rescued Juno. But before Starkiller could leave with Juno, Vader told him that he would always control Starkiller's fate, as long as Juno Eclipse lived. Starkiller left Vader behind and left with Juno, joining the rebellion. Vader would then once again clone a new apprentice using Galen Marek's body, and this one turned out to not have inherited the memories, and was even able to kill a hologram version of Juno without any remorse. When Subject 1138 attacked the cloning facility on Kamino with rebel soldiers to confront Vader, Vader gets beaten once again and captured. His penultimate Galen Marek clone didn't come to his aid as he had planned. With that, both Galen Marek and his clone had completed their destiny, with the Jedi setting the foundations of a victorious Rebel Alliance, and the new Starkiller living the life with Juno that he always wanted to have.
He was the chosen one, the one destined to bring balance to the Force, but fate had a different path for him, one that brought him to the deepest part of the dark side of the Force. In Obi-Wan Kenobi's words, he was set to destroy the Sith, not join them. But as dark as Vader's story was, his story is one of tragedy. Love was his ultimate downfall as a Jedi, but even as Vader, after having committed countless atrocities, this love kept resurfacing, with Vader having to try and keep it in bounds. Vader had destroyed Anakin Skywalker, and it should remain that way. Chapter 1. The Rise of Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker had just lost his duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi. The fallen hero clawed desperately at the loose black sand of the Mustafar embankment with his single remaining mechanical arm. His once bright blue eyes had completely vanished. In their place burned the sulphurous yellow and red-rimmed gaze of a Sith Lord, who's completely given in to the dark side. Above him stood Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Jedi Master looked down at his former brother, his heart fractured by grief. He lamented that the chosen one who was meant to destroy the Sith had instead joined them and left the Force in darkness. The heat of Mustafar's lava river ignited the clothing on Vader's severed legs, and the flames rapidly consumed his body. He screamed in agony as the fire took his skin and left him a charred ruin on the edge of the black sand. However, Obi-Wan could not bring himself to strike the killing blow against the boy he had raised. Instead, he bent down and retrieved Anakin's fallen lightsaber, believing the fires of Mustafar would finish the job for him. And so, he turned his back on Anakin and walked away. But Obi-Wan underestimated the power of the dark side. As the flames subsided, Vader clung to life through sheer force of will. His hatred for Kenobi and the galaxy became the fuel that kept his heart beating even as his body failed. Emperor Palpatine arrived on the desolate planet soon after. He sensed his apprentice was in danger and found the charred remains of the man he had seduced to the dark side. He acted quickly to save his apprentice just in time. While he was yet to master death, Sidious's knowledge of the dark side was more than enough. He used the Force to sustain Vader while his clone troopers placed the broken body into a medical capsule. They rushed him back to Coruscant, where a team of medical droids waited at the finest surgical reconstruction center in the galaxy. For the entire process of his reconstruction, the Emperor commanded that Vader remain awake as he wanted the agonizing pain of the surgery to strip away whatever remained of Anakin Skywalker. These replacements were updated versions of the same cybernetics that had once sustained General Grievous. The Emperor knew these enhancements would save Vader's life, but they would also limit his potential. It was a cruel calculation designed to keep Vader powerful enough to serve, but too broken to ever overthrow his master. When the mask was finally lowered and sealed onto his face, Vader took his first breath through the mask. Pain seared through him, yet there was one thing that had been on his mind the entire time during his reconstruction. Padme. What had happened to her? He turned and asked Sidious, who seized this final opportunity to sever the last tie to Anakin Skywalker. Unsure of the truth himself, he lied to Vader, telling him that in his anger, Vader himself had killed her. The weight of this news destroyed whatever light remained in Vader's soul. Vader unleashed a wave of telekinetic power and howled in despair, for he had sacrificed everything to save her, and in doing so, he had lost her forever. But while few knew of the truth behind Vader's rise, the rest of the galaxy was told a different story. The Empire could not admit that their new enforcer was the famous Jedi hero Anakin Skywalker. Instead, Palpatine's propaganda machine spun a tale that Skywalker had died a hero at the Jedi Temple while defending younglings. The citizens of the newly formed Empire did not know that the black-clad enforcer at the side of the Emperor's fleets who hunted down the surviving Jedi was a former Jedi. Anakin Skywalker was dead in the eyes of history. Only Darth Vader remained. Immediately after his rebirth, Vader and his master took to a balcony that overlooked the former Jedi Temple. Below them, in a massive incinerator pit near the steps of the former temple, the lightsabers of the fallen were burning. It was a funeral pyre, not for bodies, but for the very soul of the Jedi Order. Vader stood silently in his new armor, the life support systems hissing rhythmically, a constant reminder how far gone the man he used to be was, and of the machine he had become. The Emperor turned to his apprentice. He wanted to know if Vader understood why the blades of the Sith were red. Vader admitted his ignorance, noting that the archives of the Jedi were incomplete on such dark matters. Palpatine revealed that kyber crystals were alive in their own way, possessing consciousness and could feel pain. To create a red blade, a Sith had to pour their pain, their rage, and their hatred into the crystal until it bled. It was a domination of the will, a corruption of the light. Upon learning that fact, Vader looked at the burning weapons below and suggested he could simply pluck one from the fire to corrupt. He had lost his lightsaber not too long ago when his former master defeated him. But a Sith needed a blade, and Vader believed he could simply use any other lightsaber. However, Palpatine dismissed the idea immediately. He told Vader that the crystal of a Sith could not be scavenged from a bin or given as a gift. Instead, it had to be taken and won in combat from the grip of a living Jedi. This was to be Vader's final test, a rite of passage to cement his place as a true Lord of the Sith. He was to go out into the galaxy alone, without his troops or his fleet, and hunt down a survivor. Chapter 2. Acquiring his lightsaber. The Emperor sent him to the Mid-Rim in a quest for a Jedi worthy of a Sith blade. He sought a challenge. He needed a Jedi who had separated themselves from the Order, someone who might have missed the Purge. His search led him to the files of the Jedi archives, specifically looking for those who had taken the Barash vow, an oath of silence among the Jedi. Those who took this vow isolated themselves from the Order, staying far away from the affairs of the galaxy. Eventually, Vader found a name, Kirak Infila, a remnant of the High Republic. Upon Vader's arrival at Al-Dalim, Master Infila was waiting atop a sacred mountain. Vader began his ascent, but the mountain itself seemed to fight him. Infila used his resources to his advantage to slow the Dark Lord down. Vader, still accustomed to the heavy, clunky movements of his cybernetic suit, struggled against waters and the elements. By the time Vader reached the summit, he was broken and limping. Infila stood ready, seeming rather disappointed by the mechanical monstrosity before him. In the duel that followed, the Jedi Master defeated a broken and tired Vader and pushed him down the mountainside. The Jedi assumed the fall had killed the Dark Lord, but Infila was wrong, for he underestimated Vader's will to survive. Broken but fueled by rage, Vader dragged himself through the dirt and fixed his armor using scavenged droid parts. He then followed Infila to a dam, where a rematch took place. This time he fought like a monster, using the dam to his advantage as he threatened the Jedi Master to kill the locals by releasing the dam. This act gave Vader an opening, as Infila tried to stop the dam from breaking, grabbing Infila's saber and then choking the Jedi to death. He then took the Kyber crystal to Mustafar, where he needed to bleed it. Palpatine had ordered him to turn the crystal red in the place where Vader's darkness was at its strongest. In the ancient Sith shrine on Mustafar, Vader used the power of the dark side to bleed the crystal red. However, it was a battle of the mind. The light within the crystal resisted the intrusion, thrusting Vader into a vision. In this dream, he saw a different path. He saw himself turning away from the darkness. The temptation of peace was right there, but Vader's darkness spoke to him as he rejected the vision and declared there was no turning back. The things he had done, the betrayals he had committed, were too great. Anakin was dead. Vader poured all his pain and anger into the small gem until it gave a crimson glow. As he stepped out of the shrine and ignited his weapon, he had been truly reborn. The blade snapped to life, giving off a blood-red glow that symbolized the true terror of the Sith. Chapter 3. The Inquisitors. Shortly after returning to his master, Vader retired to a medical chamber so his damaged cybernetic components could be repaired. As he repaired his helmet, after having repaired and donned the rest of his suit by then, he was informed of an intruder in the Jedi Temple archives. He promptly confronted the intruder, who wielded a red lightsaber and seemed ready for a fight. The two fought each other, but the intruder appeared to take the advantage of the stiff and mechanical movements of the Sith Lord. But after a time, Vader revealed that he had simply been testing the modifications that he had recently made to his armor, and promptly destroyed the intruder's lightsaber. As Vader went in for the kill, the Emperor arrived and told him that the intruder was the Grand Inquisitor and was part of the Inquisitorius. Vader was then taken to the works, where he saw the rest of the Inquisitorius training themselves. He was told that most of the Inquisitorius were Jedi who converted to the dark side in the wake of the Order's destruction in order to save themselves. The Emperor gave Vader and Inquisitorius the mission to hunt down and finish off surviving Jedi of the Emperor's purge, with the Sith apprentice given the mission to personally train the Inquisitors. Accepting the role, he spoke to the Grand Inquisitor about their search for surviving Jedi. Vader saw the Inquisitor's target list and noticed the Jedi Archive's chief librarian named Jocasta Nu was on it. He asked the Emperor what was so important about her, and the Emperor explained that she had knowledge of the Sith that she and the Jedi Council had kept secret. The Emperor told Vader to find Nu and bring her to him, so Vader assigned the Grand Inquisitor to search the archive for information on her. At that time, Nu had returned to Coruscant and snuck into the former Jedi Temple to search for a list of young Force sensitives in her secret archives. She was about to vacate the temple when she noticed the Grand Inquisitor insulting the Jedi knowledge he was examining. His comments eventually drove her over the edge, and she confronted him with her lightsaber. Vader, who had learned from the Security Bureau that a Jedi survivor had infiltrated the temple, arrived at the entrance just as Clone Commander Fox of the Coruscant Guard had already sealed the place. The Sith Lord arrived at the temple and found Jedi Librarian Nu fighting the Grand Inquisitor. Vader stopped the Inquisitor from slaying Nu, who fled. Chasing her, Vader was confronted in the archive vault by the librarian droid Cater, who identified him as Anakin Skywalker. To protect his identity, Vader destroyed the droid. Shortly after, Nu then used a lightsaber rifle to knock him back. She called him the Emperor's tool before purging the entire library's knowledge. However, Nu's rifle failed, prompting her to throw the explosive weapon. Vader deflected the blast, and Nu used the resulting chaos to escape the scene, amidst blaster fires from Commander Fox and his fellow clones. Vader then appeared through the wall, and the clones assumed he was a Jedi too, and fired on him. At that moment, Commander Fox approached the scene on an Imperial patrol ship and realized that they were firing on Vader. Fox tried to explain the misunderstanding, but before uttering out the rest of his words, his neck was snapped apart by Vader. Nu then found herself cornered by Vader and the clones. She attempted to jump off, only for Vader to use the Force to catch her. He brought her to his ship, and there she told the clones that he was the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. Intent on keeping his identity a secret, Vader used the Force to throw the clones off the ship. In his anger, he also killed Nu. Vader then crashed the ship and contacted Sidious to tell him that Nu died in an attempt to escape. Afraid of the possibility of Sidious using Nu's list of Force-sensitive children to create more dark side agents, Vader destroyed the information. He could not risk having a rival, especially when the Inquisitorius was already there to serve as a constant reminder that there were other Jedi willing to bend to the dark side of the Force. Shortly after defeating the old Jedi librarian, Vader followed his master to the Works District on Coruscant, where the two prepared for a sparring match in which Sidious intended to teach him a lesson. But Vader was quickly overpowered by Sidious, who knocked the saber out of his hand and quickly pushed him away with the Force. As Vader was on the ground, his saber was grabbed by Sidious while he told him that he still fought like a Jedi. His master told him that the lightsaber was not his only weapon, and that the dark side of the Force was his true weapon, for it was a weapon that touches everything. On his knees, Vader told his master that he understood this lesson. Chapter 4. Cementing his place within the Empire. At that point, Vader had begun to truly embrace the dark side, while also realizing he had lost all that he cared for. To that end, he embraced his role as the Emperor's chief enforcer. Few knew who he was, and even fewer suspected that he had once been Anakin Skywalker. However, his appearance at the Imperial court and the favor he carried from the Emperor earned him the distrust of Imperial officers. They resented him for appearing out of nowhere and having authority over them because of his link to his master. They also resented his heavy-handed treatment of them, such as when he used the Force in the presence of his master to choke Colonel Baroki. In secret, Baroki and another Imperial officer plotted to assassinate Vader, whose position in the new Empire they did not understand. For Vader, the situation came to a head when he investigated a Jedi sighting on Kabaria. Accompanied by the Ninth Sister, he headed to the bar where the identification had happened. Although the Ninth Sister had originally been planning to investigate alone, Vader, though, decided to come along because he wanted to fight another Jedi. However, instead of a Jedi, Vader was instead attacked by bounty hunters. After fending them off, though he managed to disarm him and destroy his lightsaber, he learned from them that they were hired by someone in the Imperial Executive Building on Coruscant, specifically the office of his master. As he realized there could be a traitor within the highest echelons of the Empire, Vader killed the bounty hunters and proceeded to return to Coruscant. Now suspecting that the Emperor had placed the bounty on his head, the Dark Lord planned to confront his master about his intentions while constructing a new saber. On Coruscant, Vader informed his masters of the events of Kabaria and the investigation into the kill order against him before, directly asking his master whether he had placed it on his head as part of a test. Noticing Vader's new lightsaber, the Emperor asked to see it and approved of its design. He also chastised his apprentice for believing that he would resort to such methods as placing a bounty on his head if he wanted to have him killed. Vader returned to his quarters where he meditated on the past events and his master's words. Thinking back to all that had happened, he eventually realized the cause of the conspiracy against him was that his sudden elevation had caused concern and fear among the ranks of the Imperial officers. Despite a lack of proof, Vader became convinced that Colonel Baroki must be involved in the conspiracy. The Dark Lord met with the Emperor and shared his conclusions and requested that he be publicly recognized and allowed to show them the consequences of opposing him. The Emperor agreed to Vader's plan, but forbade him from killing Tarkin as he was essential to his plans. The Emperor gathered the elite officers of the growing Imperial military to clarify the new hierarchy. He formally introduced Vader as his emissary who spoke with his voice and whose commands would need to be obeyed as if they had come from the Emperor himself. The Emperor then moved aside and allowed Vader to speak, and the Dark Lord summoned 5 officers before him, including Colonel Baroki. From there, he instituted a new rule stating that for every assassination attempt he survived, 5 officers chosen at random would be executed. He instantly executed the 5 designated officers with a forced choke before departing, leaving the remaining officers completely stunned. With his position in the hierarchy established, Vader did not need to hold an official military rank, but instead acted as the de facto commander-in-chief of the Imperial military. Then, the Emperor told Vader it was time to prove himself as his enforcer, sending him to Mon Cala with a team to investigate a possible Jedi advisor alongside Moff Tarkin. Vader arrived with his Inquisitors, and after the Imperial ambassador of Mon Cala was assassinated, prompted a full-scale invasion by Tarkin's forces. During his time on Mon Cala, Vader located a Jedi, an Iktochi Padawan named Farron Barr, and subsequently agreed to Tarkin's request to capture King Lichar to quickly end the conflict. Vader seized Lichar at his royal command bunker, only to be confronted by Barr, who had revealed he had assassinated the ambassador to send the Mon Calamari into war. Overhearing this, Lichar ordered a ceasefire and surrender, but Vader killed Barr, who prophesied a great rebellion. Due to the events on Mon Cala, Vader ordered the imprisonment and torture of the people of Mon Cala, a root cause of the rebellion Barr had foreseen in order to quell any resistance in its tracks. Not too long after the events on Mon Cala, Vader became aware of a project that was taking up many resources, so he began investigating, which led him to the data vault on Scarif. There he found Project Stardust, which was a large battle station the size of a small moon. Vader studied its design before he was interrupted by Tarkin, who was very displeased with Vader's snooping. Tarkin told him he was not authorized to be there, but Vader claimed that the Force was all the authorization he needed. Despite Vader's strong stance as a being beyond the regular Imperial ranks, Tarkin relented and produced a hologram of the Emperor, who told Vader he did not recall sending him to Scarif. Vader apologized and told the Emperor he only sought to study the ways in which the Empire would extend its rule over the galaxy. The Emperor told Vader of a new mission he was to go on, and said there had been certain instances of sabotage during the Death Star's construction. Vader needed to discover the source before it got worse. The Emperor further told him that Tarkin had full authority over him, and that if he disappointed him, he disappointed Palpatine. As disgruntled as he may have been, Vader listened to his master's order and went to Geonosis to meet with Commander Orson Krennic, the de facto project manager for the Death Star. Shortly after arriving, they survived what seemed to be an attempt on their life, as Krennic claimed it was Tarkin sabotaging his efforts in order to get rid of him and take over the project. Vader asked him if there was any proof, and Krennic was not able to produce anything. The commander then explained to him the incidents that had occurred in the last 3 months. Vader gave his knowledge on the situation to loyalty officer Sid Udra, who met him at the Petronaki Arena to discuss what she suspected. She told Vader that as much as Tarkin and Krennic's rivalry caused tension between them, it was unlikely for either to be the culprit. She then offered Vader with another individual to look into named Galen Erso. The Dark Lord looked through Galen Erso's office and found many Kyber crystals. He then found a recording of Erso and his family and noticed that Erso called his daughter Stardust, which was the code name for the Death Star's project. Finally, Vader found an Uthaka egg in a box. Knowing the Geonosians were a slave race and were forbidden from breeding freely, he confronted Krennic about this. Krennic denied that it was him and suggested that some of the slaves may have sent it as a distress call to Erso. Vader then deduced for himself the culprits for the sabotage. He and a squad of death troopers thus went down to the surface and entered a Geonosian hive, fighting the Geonosian queen and her underlings. The Geonosians stood no chance, and Vader slaughtered them like animals. After the battle, he returned to Tarkin and reported his findings to him, revealing that he discovered the Geonosians' treachery. Tarkin finally asked him if there was anything else, and Vader revealed that he knew that this Death Star project was able to destroy a planet. The Moff asked how he knew, and he told him of the kyber crystals he saw in Urso's office. Tarkin then asked Vader why he was not happy about this revelation, to which the Sith replied that he had a distrust in technology. But the Moff made sure to remind Vader that he was a technological aberration himself, before realizing that the Dark Lord wanted to be the only technological weapon under the Emperor's command. Angered by the Moff's words, Vader left after giving Tarkin a prediction of his future, that the Death Star was to be his tomb. Chapter 5. Palpatine's Enforcer. After the things he had given up and had gone through during the early years of the Empire, Vader had already accepted his place not only as a Sith Lord, but also the Empire's wrath, the extension of his master's will and darkness. To that end, throughout the Empire's reign of terror, Vader remained one of the few who enjoyed direct access to Emperor Palpatine. He was the Emperor's preferred envoy for all matters of direct interest, becoming known as the Emperor's Fist to both Imperial soldiers and criminals alike. With Palpatine preoccupied by governing the vast galaxy, Vader took a direct hand against the Empire's enemies. This included the swift elimination of rebel uprisings and overseeing the continued construction of the planet-destroying Death Star alongside Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin. Vader's position of authority was absolute, even giving him the ability to alter Imperial records when he deemed it necessary. Imperial officers came to fear and mistrust Vader, wary of his immense power and his continued devotion to the ancient ways of the Force. Yet, despite the widespread fear he inspired in the officer ranks, Vader was held in high esteem by the Stormtrooper Corps. He often fought alongside them on the front lines rather than commanding from a safe distance. Vader retained command of the elite unit he had led as Anakin Skywalker, the 501st Legion. After the Emperor retired the original clone troopers, the new recruits of the 501st were sometimes trained by the Dark Lord himself, earning the Legion the new moniker of Vader's Fist. As the Emperor's enforcer, Vader was deployed on many secret and gruesome missions. One of his earliest tasks was an execution on Murkana. He was also sent to the mineral-rich world of Bandamir to brutally put down a miners' rebellion against Imperial exploitation. Later, he was dispatched to Skako Minor to wipe out the remaining loyalist of the separatist Wat Tambor, massacring the planet's ruling council, including Tambor's own son. With every calculated act of cruelty and enforcement, Darth Vader cemented his fearsome reputation across the galaxy as the black-armored Iron Fist of the new Galactic Empire. He then continued his merciless work for the Empire, tracking down Davgar Leon on Torku, a scientist who sabotaged a key Imperial weapon. But while most of his missions for the Emperor were devoid of emotions and attachments, one incident allowed him to momentarily revisit his past and his emotions. Around 2 years into the Imperial era, he traveled to the snowy moon that was the site of the Tribunal crash during the Clone Wars. It was the same ship that ferried Ahsoka Tano, his former Padawan, and Darth Maul right when Order 66 happened. Vader investigated the wreckage and discovered a lightsaber partly frozen near a memorial to the clone company that died there. It belonged to Ahsoka, as Vader was familiar with the saber he once tinkered with. He ignited the saber's blue blade, thinking Tano also died on that site, thereby closing one of the few remaining chapters of his life as Anakin Skywalker. But Vader heard a squawking sound, revealing a bird that seemed familiar but strange to him. Suddenly, the Dark Lord had an inkling that his Padawan might have survived. Yet he had no proof, as he did not see her presence. As such, he still presumed she had perished together with her clone company. No matter, Vader continued his role as the Imperial Enforcer, subduing different worlds in Palpatine's name. 4 years into the Imperial era, he fought the Benethi in wild space, subduing them by killing their king. And unlike Anakin, who valued the lives of his men, Vader subdued the Benethi at the cost of countless stormtroopers he regarded as dispensable. Chapter 6. Ryloth, the First True Rebellion. It had already been 5 years since the day he fell to the dark side, and Darth Vader had been the very tool the Emperor used to subjugate and control the galaxy. But the Twi'leks of Ryloth, who have always been defiant against tyranny, were all too familiar with the Empire's MO. Their vibrant homeworld, rich with the valuable resource known as spice, had fallen under the iron rule of Emperor Palpatine. This economic exploitation was the very seed of a growing defiance, a collective yearning for liberation that manifested as the Free Ryloth movement. On Coruscant, Vader met with Emperor Palpatine and the notoriously corrupt Senator Orn Free Ta of Ryloth. The movement, though small, had begun to impact the flow of spice, an important resource for the Empire. To that end, the Emperor believed this was more about control rather than freedom. He knew the resistance was being aided from within the Imperial structure, likely by someone close to Senator Ta, who embodied the self-serving political class that allowed the Empire to flourish. Vader, ever direct, simply suggested killing Ta and his entire staff, believing that eliminating the spies would end the trouble. However, Palpatine saw a deeper target. He was not interested in punishing a single traitor, for he sought to destroy the very roots of the treachery. Sidious saw the rebellion as a flicker of hope, and by eliminating that hope, could the Empire truly secure its endless reign. The journey to Ryloth was thus conceived not as a simple state visit, but as a masterful trap, designed to lure the rebels out of hiding. Palpatine, Vader, and the unwitting Ta were the bait. The Emperor aimed to encourage an attack, hoping that the movement would see an opportunity to strike against their corrupt senator and the Imperial leadership. Once exposed, Palpatine would personally ensure that the Free Ryloth movement and the underlying spirit of Twi'lek liberation were crushed completely, sending a clear message across the galaxy that there was no room for hope or freedom under the banner of a new galactic empire. Vader and Palpatine journeyed to Ryloth on board the Perilous, but upon the great ship's exit from hyperspace, the Sith Lords were met by a hail of fire as the Perilous slammed into a field of spatial mines laid by Chom Syndulla's determined rebels. The Ryloth freedom fighters attacked the Sith Lord with a swarm of reprogrammed Vulture droids carrying buzz droids that were equally dangerous. These attacks weakened their Star Destroyer to the point where it had become nearly impossible to continue their approach on that very same ship. Vader did what he could to destroy the droids, even using the Force heavily to survive the encounter. Meanwhile, the few remaining fighters were swiftly annihilated by Vader's squadrons, and he himself returned to the relative safety of the Perilous. He marched straight to the Star Destroyer's bridge and used the dark side to force-choke the terrified Senator Ta for a short time, informing him of the traitor within his staff that had been responsible for the successful assault on the Perilous. The utterly terrified senator vowed to find the culprit, but the Emperor quickly had Ta and his entire staff confined to their quarters, fearing further treachery. An immediate order was then broadcast from the Imperial headquarters on Ryloth, demanding any and all repair ships to aid the badly damaged Perilous as it limped toward the planet. Unbeknownst to Vader and the Emperor, some of these Twi'lek repair teams were secretly members of the Free Ryloth movement. They were ordered to plant explosives in the ship's main core. When Vader learned of this, he issued a chilling order, commanding that all of the Twi'lek repair teams, numbering over 100, were to be executed without question, regardless of their guilt or innocence. However, before Vader could do more to preserve their ship, the main hyperdrive core had been riddled with timed charges, set to detonate if anyone attempted to disarm or remove them. Vader instantly concluded the massive ship was lost and ordered the captain to immediately evacuate. He reunited with the Emperor and left on the shuttle, mere minutes before the Star Destroyer was obliterated. Then the Imperial traitor, Belcor Dre, provided Cham Syndulla with the transponder identity of the Emperor's shuttle, and he directed Isval and her group aboard the escort boat to attack the fleeing Sith Lords. Vader's exceptional piloting skills, however, allowed him to evade the escort boat. Then he turned around and flew close enough to the enemy ship and force-choked Isval and her co-pilot. But before they lost consciousness, Isval managed to ram the shuttle with her escort boat. The crash disabled the shuttle's main power, forcing Vader to attempt a crash landing on Ryloth. As he guided the stricken ship through the atmosphere, he experienced distracting flashes of his past, haunting visions of events and people he had lost. Though distracted, Vader managed to land the ship in Ryloth's equatorial forest region, but his momentary lapse did not go unnoticed by the Emperor, who noted that the landing had been poor compared to what he knew Vader was capable of. After surviving Twi'lek attacks and the harsh forested environment full of local beasts that tried to kill them, the Sith Lords ran into a young Twi'lek girl. Sidious wanted to kill her out of fear she might reveal their location to the Freedom Fighters, but Vader convinced his master to spare the girl and demand her to bring them to her village, where they were able to obtain the communicator to reach Moff Morse. Soon after, Vader and Palpatine were surrounded by Syndulla's forces as they had finally caught up to them through the forest. But Morse's Imperial ships also arrived, aiding them in quelling the Twi'lek Rebellion's final, desperate stand. As the stormtroopers killed the Twi'leks, Vader noticed a trio of key Twi'leks, Syndulla, Isval, and Gul watching from afar, and he went to pursue them. Gul and Syndulla escaped, leaving Vader to capture Isval and bring her before the Emperor. Palpatine mocked her, telling her that her people had accomplished nothing, and Vader subsequently executed her with a swift, cold motion. On the Emperor's final orders, Vader then killed the innocent villagers to leave no witnesses, concluding their bloody mission. Chapter 7. Vader's Continued Rise. As powerful as Vader had become while he held court in the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, his powers had limits. He was a looming shadow judging over the elite of the elite in the Empire. But for all his power, Vader could not shake Moff Tarkin off his back. The Emperor gave him a directive to work together with Tarkin to investigate a rebel cell on Murkon. The mission quickly became a personal hunt when dissidents stole Tarkin's ship, the Carrion Spike, which happened to house Vader's personal meditation chamber. Forced to work in tandem, the two pursued the thieves across the galaxy. Vader used his connection to the dark side in his stolen chamber to track the vessel through the void. From Murkana to the Findar system, the duo chased their quarry, commandeering ships and navigating false leads. It soon became clear that the insurgency had help from within the highest ranks of the Imperial military. The man was Vice Admiral Dodd Rancet, who had thought he could manipulate the Empire for his own gain. But he could not hide his treachery from the Sith. Upon confirming Rancet's betrayal, Vader sealed the Admiral in an escape pod and ordered it destroyed, turning the traitor into space dust. While Tarkin finished off the rebel cell, Vader spent the following weeks rooting out every associate, scientist, and syndicate member who had aided Rancet and his co-conspirator Birch Teller. The galaxy learned once again that there was no hiding from the Empire's fist. But what also stood out was Vader's growing professional relationship with Tarkin, a man he regarded as a rival for the Emperor's affection. As much as the Dark Lord did not like the idea of working with Tarkin, they'd become a formidable duo, seemingly unstoppable in enforcing the Emperor's will. Though a precarious one, this partnership had become the most dangerous in the Empire. Tarkin, who respected Vader in a professional capacity, was surprised to learn of the odd request coming from the Sith Lord himself some days later after their mission. He wanted the Moff to hunt him down. This was the favor Tarkin owed Vader for the events on Mon Cala. Initially, Tarkin could not believe such a request. Why would a powerful Sith Lord ask an Imperial ally to hunt him down? But then it became clear Vader simply wanted a challenge. The Sith Lord had grown bored because the surviving Jedi were weak and offered him no challenge. So he wished to sharpen his skills against the greatest military mind in the Empire. Tarkin accepted the challenge and gathered a team of elite hunters to track the Sith Lord on the isolated world of Chandar's Folly. Tarkin knew that fighting a Jedi with energy weapons was foolish, so he outfitted his team with slug throwers and flamethrowers to bypass Vader's lightsaber defenses. With these tactics initially working, the Moff thought he saw hesitation in Vader's posture. However, the hesitation was short-lived, and Vader turned the tables on Tarkin's hunters. Then the Grand Moff deduced that Vader was invincible as long as he held his Crimson Blade, so he devised a plan to steal it. After sacrificing several men to the slaughter, one of the hunters managed to snatch the weapon from Vader's grip. This loss did not make Vader retreat, but instead made him far more dangerous. He began to use the Force fully, snapping necks and crushing throats from a distance. In the final hours of the hunt, Vader deactivated his life support suit to be completely silent. He ambushed the camp, killing the hunters one by one until he reclaimed his lightsaber. Tarkin was the last man left, and he fled into the Stormlands, but he knew he could not outrun the inevitable. He fell to his knees as Vader loomed over him, ready to claim victory. However, Vader's hubris had placed him on high ground in a lightning storm, and a massive bolt of energy struck his metallic suit, making Vader drop to the ground. Tarkin survived the blast and called for his ship, deeming the hunt to be over. Yet, as they waited, the paralyzed Vader reached out with the Force and choked Tarkin one last time to prove that he had not truly been defeated. But the Moff barely survived by crawling far from Vader's range. That encounter proved one thing, that Vader would not hesitate to kill Tarkin even if they were allies for the same cause. With his skills sharp as ever, the Sith Lord recovered from that skirmish with Tarkin's hunters and was made aware of a new hunt, someone who might be a true challenge. Eth Koth, a Jedi Master who once held a seat in the High Council. Together with fifth brother, Tualan Yaluna, and the 13th sister Inquisitors, he journeyed to a planet where Koth had become a religious figure. In the duel that followed, the Jedi Master more than held his ground. It wasn't until Vader used Koth's wife and child as leverage that he managed to kill him. Vader's mercy, of course, knew no bounds, as not even his allies were spared from his wrath. When Yaluna and the 13th sister went rogue shortly after the mission to kill Koth, the Sith Lord personally hunted and killed the Inquisitor duo. Chapter 8: Vader's Fortress. The treachery of two Inquisitors gave Vader enough reason to convince the Emperor that the Inquisitorius was incompetent. Unconvinced, Palpatine chastised Vader for the mess he caused when he hunted the Inquisitors throughout Coruscant. To that end, they agreed that the best decision was to relocate the Inquisitors rather than discard them, to prevent any damage to the capital and to minimize personal ambition on their part. The Emperor then commanded Vader to bring order to Alderaan, but the cyborg refused. Instead, he demanded a planet of his own to rule. Palpatine offered the sands of Tatooine or the lakes of Naboo, but Vader chose the hellscape of Mustafar. It was the crucible where Anakin Skywalker died and Darth Vader was truly born. Intrigued by this sentiment, Sidious granted the request and bestowed upon him the Mask of Lord Momin, an ancient helmet possessed by a Sith heretic who had long been erased from the archives. Vader took Padme's old Naboo royal starship, which had been recovered, and used it as his personal vessel to the volcanic world, accompanied by Colonel Bren and her aide. As they breached the atmosphere, he deactivated the shields and allowed the fire to blacken the silver hull of the ship even further. Once on the surface, he sought a locus of dark-side energy to build his sanctuary. But while Bren drafted standard designs, the Mask of Momin exerted its will. It possessed the aide, murdered Bren, and drew a blueprint of geometrically impossible architecture. Upon realizing what had happened, Vader took the mask to the dark cave and communicated with the spirit within. Momin revealed his history as a sculptor of flesh and spirit, a Sith who had trapped his own essence in the mask to escape oblivion. He promised Vader that the specific design of the castle would act as a key. If built correctly, it would tune the energies of the Force and open a door between worlds. The spirit of the ancient Sith Lord went as far as tempting Vader with the possibility of reuniting with Padme. Desperate to reclaim what he had killed, Vader agreed to the partnership, but warned the ancient ghost that betrayal would result in eternal torment. For 2 long years, the construction continued under the fiery skies of Mustafar. Momin possessed the bodies of locals to direct the work, using Imperial resources to raise a jagged black tower above the lava falls. However, the dark side was not easily tamed. Each attempt to activate the portal resulted in catastrophic failure. Fueled by frustration, Vader would slaughter Momin's host body, only to place the mask on another victim to begin the work anew. He would stop at nothing to tear open the galaxy and find his lost love. And as he was constructing his fortress on Mustafar, a similar fortress for the Inquisitorius was being constructed on the watery moon of Nur. The Dark Lord then traveled to Nur to secure a holocron of Force-sensitive children, only to find the second sister failing in her duties against the surviving Jedi, Cal Kestis and Ser Junda. Vader executed the Inquisitor for her weakness before she could return to the light, and he promptly tossed Junda aside so he could toy with young Kestis, who was no match for the Sith Lord. Thanks to Junda's efforts, however, Kestis barely survived his encounter with Vader. Undeterred by his failure on Nur, the Dark Lord returned to Mustafar to resume the construction of his fortress using Momin's designs. When the 9th design was finally completed, the natives of the planet revolted in a desperate attack. Momin used this distraction to betray Vader, opening the door to the other world for himself and resurrecting his original body from the past. Vader crushed the native uprising before turning his wrath upon Momin. Though the ancient lord mocked Vader's ignorance of the dark side, he was silenced forever when Vader crushed him beneath a giant slab of stone. Finally alone, the Dark Lord stepped through the bleeding portal and left his physical form behind. He wandered through a realm of visions where he battled spirits of the Jedi and faced the ghost of his complicated history. He saw the masters who claimed to be his fathers, Obi-Wan and Palpatine, and struck them down with hatred. At the end of his journey, he found Padme Amidala standing on a balcony. He reached out to her as Anakin Skywalker, desperate to save her, but she told him that Anakin was dead before throwing herself into the void. A blinding blue light cast Vader back into his broken reality. He realized then that he could not restore his wife, so he destroyed the portal and sealed the door forever. When the Emperor contacted him to ask if he had found the truth he needed, Vader stood before his towering black castle and simply said yes. He finally accepted that the past was dead, leaving him to rule as the solitary master of his own obsidian fortress. Chapter 9. The Hunt for Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the past truly was not dead, for Obi-Wan Kenobi still lived. 10 years into his ascension as a Sith Lord, Vader finally saw a chance to kill his former master once and for all. The third sister, Reva Savander, had used a young Leia Organa to lure Kenobi out of hiding, kidnapping her to force the Jedi Master into action. Obi-Wan rescued Leia from the planet Daiyu, only to find out from the third sister that Anakin Skywalker survived his injuries. Before that, Kenobi never knew his apprentice had been alive the entire time. And as Obi-Wan grappled with that information, Vader learned of his former master's location from the third sister. In his attempt to use the third sister for his own benefit, Vader dangled the title of Grand Inquisitor to her, as she believed the original Grand Inquisitor had died following her betrayal on Daiyu. Vader simply intended to use her to get to Kenobi. Upon learning that Obi-Wan was on Mapuzo, Vader arrived with 3 Inquisitors and a squad of stormtroopers, terrorizing the locals in order to draw the Jedi out. He then pursued Obi-Wan to a quarry in a rematch that showed just how rusty the old Jedi's skills had become. Vader, who never stopped fighting and training since their last meeting 10 years ago, toyed with Kenobi using the Force, attempting to burn him using flammable rocks. However, Tala Durith, a traitor within the Empire, rescued Obi-Wan from a slow and painful death. Angry at the outcome, Vader was about to kill the third sister until she revealed that she had planted a tracker on Leia's droid to not only reveal Obi-Wan's location, but also the location of the Hidden Path, a secret network of Jedi sympathizers who trafficked Force-sensitive people away from the Empire. Impressed, Vader spared the third sister. The Dark Lord was on board the Devastator as he reflected on a training duel he had against Kenobi during his years as a Padawan. But upon learning that Obi-Wan had been hiding on Jabim, he immediately set a course to that planet to destroy his former master once and for all. Vader forced his way into the hangar of the Hidden Path's base. There, he found a transport attempting to leave the planet. Believing Obi-Wan was inside, he used the Force to ground the ship and tear it apart, only to find out it was an empty decoy. Instead, Obi-Wan and the refugees were on a different transport that immediately left while the Dark Lord was distracted. Meanwhile, the third sister had other motives. She wanted revenge, as she was one of the younglings who witnessed Anakin Skywalker's attack on the Jedi Temple a decade ago. So she used this opportunity to kill Vader. But the Sith was far too powerful, easily defeating Reva and revealing to her that the true Grand Inquisitor had survived. Leaving the third sister to death on Jabim, Vader proceeded to chase the transport. However, Obi-Wan knew the former Anakin was after him and not the refugees, so he separated himself from the transport and went down on a nearby rocky moon to lure Vader away from the ship full of innocent people. Overcome with anger, Vader allowed his emotions to get the best of him when he decided to set a course to Obi-Wan's location instead of following the refugees. The decision led to a second rematch between the former master and pupil duo. Initially, Vader had the upper hand against Kenobi, believing he had won when he buried the Jedi under a pile of rocks. But Obi-Wan, who had reconnected himself with the Force, regained his old strength and skill. He proceeded to defeat Vader, damaging a part of his mask to reveal the eye of the man he once called brother. Kenobi apologized to Anakin for failing him as a master. However, accepting that his decisions were his own, Vader told Obi-Wan that he did not fail him. He said that Kenobi did not kill Anakin. Instead, it was Darth Vader who killed Anakin Skywalker, allowing the Jedi Master to fully understand that this Sith persona had completely taken over the Chosen One. Obi-Wan left Vader on that rocky planet, with his last sentence being, "Goodbye, Darth." Not too long after, the Dark Lord reunited with Palpatine after the necessary repairs on his suit. Noticing Vader's agitation, Darth Sidious suggested that Vader was yet to completely move on from his past. But when he realized the subtle threat hidden behind the Emperor's words, Vader simply told his master that Obi-Wan meant nothing to him. Chapter 10. The Prelude to Rebellion. Reeling from his failure to destroy his former master, Darth Vader had a new task, one that could very well disappoint Darth Sidious if he ever would fail again. Bode Akuna, a Jedi survivor working for the Empire, secretly tipped off the Empire about the location of the Jedi archive Seer Junda and her master, Eno Cordova, restored on the holy moon of Jeddah. Vader and his forces arrived with haste, attacking the archives and laying waste to any of the Jedi's allies on that planet. The skirmish led to a meeting between the Dark Lord and Seer Junda, who had regained her strength as a Jedi Master. Junda fought hard and, at one point, could have killed Vader, but the Sith Lord countered with a quick and decisive blow that killed Junda. Vader walked away from the duel injured and limping from the hard-fought win against a Jedi Master. With his victory over Junda and their small group of insurgents, Vader had become a magnet for death. But such death was not to come from the vengeful Jedi he hunted. Instead, this lust for revenge came from a wealthy industrialist whose son had been a victim of Vader's wrath. The man sent assassins to kill the Sith Lord, but all of them easily fell to his red blade. Sometime later, Vader was summoned by Emperor Palpatine. Upon entering the Emperor's throne room, he sensed a disturbance in the Force. Instantly, with a violent shove of the Force, he hurled the Emperor aside and cast the throne out the window just as a hidden bomb detonated in a fiery explosion. The royal guards had failed their duty, so Vader executed 4 of them for reacting too slowly while berating the remaining 5 for their incompetence. The trail of treachery led to the ancient and dark Hindsnake cult, whose influence had rotted the loyalty of those around the Emperor. The Hindsnake cult was an ancient religious group who had access to a dark sorcery-type power, and it seemed they wanted the Emperor removed. Vader, alongside 2 royal guards, thus traveled to a moon orbiting a derelict Venator-class Star Destroyer where the cult was located. He walked into the vacuum of space to inspect the ghost ship and found the crew missing. The clues pointed to the moon's surface where the survivors had likely been devoured by the local fauna. Vader descended to the surface, where pressed onward toward the ruins of an ancient temple where the dark sorcerers waited for him, having anticipated his arrival. They greeted him and offered a guide through their temple. Vader agreed, wanting to learn their motives. As Vader moved through the temple, though, he was suddenly encapsulated by vines, which choked the cyborg Sith, removed his mask until his breath failed him and his mind drifted into a vision. He saw himself unmasked and free of his painful armor as he finally cut down Obi-Wan Kenobi in a duel. The vision shifted to show him withstanding Palpatine's lightning and rising above his master not as a Sith, but as a servant of the Hindsnake cult wearing their insignia. The cult essentially promised him one thing: the death of his master at his hands at the exchange of serving them. They were willing to give him everything he wanted, the deaths of his 2 masters. After all, Vader himself had never been a master. He was a slave to his ties with Kenobi. More importantly, he was tethered to Palpatine's dark power, unable to rise above it. But Vader realized he was no one's pawn, and he refused to trade one leash for another. He shattered the illusion and slaughtered the cultist without mercy. He took their power source, which was a glowing energy crystal, and left the ruins behind him. Upon his return from his mission, Vader gave the crystal to Tarkin as part of the preparations for the Death Star. Meanwhile, he soon discovered that the industrialist who had seemingly painted a target on his back had already committed suicide. Finally, upon his return to his master, Vader learned that Palpatine had orchestrated everything to serve as a test to the Dark Lord, and he passed with flying colors. Chapter 11. The Master reunites with the Apprentice. Vader had just defeated a Jedi Master and silenced an entire cult, yet he still hungered to find Obi-Wan Kenobi to complete his quest for vengeance and solidify the Empire's power, but he heeded the Emperor's command to be patient. In the meantime, Palpatine told him of a rising threat from Force-sensitive children who could one day challenge their rule. The rebels happened to be a band called the Spectres, led by the Jedi Kanan Jarrus and his apprentice Ezra Bridger. With that, Vader tasked the Grand Inquisitor, and eventually Tarkin, to hunt them down on the planet Lothal, where they operated. However, the Spectres defeated and unexpectedly managed to kill the Grand Inquisitor. Also, despite his best efforts, Tarkin also failed to apprehend them. This forced Vader to spring into action, and as punishment for the Grand Inquisitor's defeat to a Padawan no less, he bound his spirit to an ancient outpost in Mustafar to serve as a trap for other Jedi. Knowing he needed to be more active in his hunt, Vader set a trap to discover the location of the Jedi fleet and bait the Jedi Master and apprentice duo to reveal themselves. In the middle of an entire planetary lockdown on Lothal, Vader left a single shuttle unguarded on purpose to have Kanan and his crew try to use it to escape the planet. The rebels took the bait, and Vader stepped out of the shadows to confront them. He ignited his lightsaber and engaged both Jarrus and Bridger, toying with them as if they were children. Kanan and Bridger tried their best to match Vader's might, but were completely outmatched. However, due to the help of their rebel friends who brought some stationary ATDPs down on Vader to distract him, the rebels managed to escape on the stolen shuttle. But Vader did not pursue them with his full might because he had already succeeded. He had allowed them to escape with a tracking beacon attached to their hull. Vader then got into his personal TIE Advanced and followed the signal to the hidden location of the Phoenix Squadron fleet. The rebels scrambled their A-Wing fighters to intercept the lone ship, but they were no match for the former Anakin Skywalker, one of the best pilots in the galaxy. Vader decimated the rebel squadron single-handedly. He proceeded to cripple the rebel command ship known as Phoenix Home, leaving the fleet in ruins. Knowing their allies were in danger, the Spectres boarded their ship, the Ghost, to try to run from Vader's lone assault. It seemed like their rebellion was about to end right then and there, as the Dark Lord single-handedly crippled the rebels. However, curious about the powerful enigma behind that dark mask, Ahsoka Tano and Kanan Jarrus combined their powers to probe the Sith's mind. Tano, who was once Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, learned a dark truth. The Force connection revealed a familiar presence, one she had not sensed since the final days of the Clone Wars. She discovered that the man behind the Durasteel armor was none other than her mentor. Vader, who felt the probing, also realized the familiarity behind the presence. More than 10 years after discovering Ahsoka's buried lightsabers in the snow, she can now say for certain that his Togruta apprentice survived. With that knowledge, he abandoned the destruction of the rebel fleet to pursue the Ghost with the intent to capture the rebels alive. Admiral Constantine arrived with his Star Destroyers to assist, but his clumsy activation of tractor beams ensnared Vader's ship instead of the rebels. This blunder allowed the Ghost to enter into hyperspace, leaving the Sith Lord fuming in the grip of his own fleet. Vader later contacted Emperor Palpatine to report his victory and a significant discovery. He revealed that Ahsoka Tano lived, causing the Emperor to speculate that she could lead them to other survivors like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Palpatine urged patience and instructed Vader to dispatch his Inquisitors to hunt the rebel survivors down. The fifth brother and seventh sister took up the chase, eventually tracking the Jedi to an ancient temple on Lothal. Though the rebels escaped again, Vader visited the site himself. He assured his minions that the growing power of the Jedi would ultimately lead to their destruction, setting the stage for a future confrontation with his past. As the chase for the Spectres went on, Vader sent out more Inquisitors, but they failed time and time again to apprehend the rebels. It wasn't until he got the word from the Inquisitor on the planet Malachor, an ancient world once belonging to the Sith Order, that he sprung back into action. The Inquisitors had reported that not only was Ahsoka Tano present on the planet, but also the former Sith Lord Maul, who wanted to unlock the superweapon housed inside the temple on Malachor. Vader thus took the matters into his own hands and traveled to Malachor aboard his TIE Advanced. He arrived just in time. Although his Inquisitors had all been beaten, the Jedi had not yet managed to completely activate the ancient Sith temple. As Vader descended atop the temple to confront Ezra Bridger, he made quick work of the boy and was about to execute him until a familiar voice distracted him. Ahsoka. At last, she had arrived, setting the stage for a fateful duel between the former master and apprentice. While she initially had doubts about the man behind the black mask, Ahsoka was finally convinced that it was Skywalker who had been terrorizing the galaxy this entire time. Unlike his feelings for Kenobi, Vader initially had no reason to hate Ahsoka, so he offered his former apprentice a chance to live if she gave up the location of any other Jedi in hiding. But Tano refused his terms, and despite the overwhelming evidence, she still struggled to accept that the armored giant before her was truly Anakin Skywalker. Vader answered by claiming he had destroyed the weak Skywalker, which prompted Tano to swear vengeance upon him. When he reminded her that revenge was not the Jedi way, she declared that she was no Jedi. A duel ensued, with Vader doing double time. He was fending off Ahsoka while also trying to prevent the Spectres from escaping with the Sith holocron to activate the temple. After throwing Ahsoka off the temple walls, he turned back to get the holocron. As he used the Force to grab it from Ezra's hands, though, he was distracted enough for Ahsoka to sneak up again and manage to strike a blow against his head. Her strike had destroyed part of his mask, and it revealed the scarred face of Anakin Skywalker, similar to Vader's duel with Kenobi. He rose slowly, burning with anger for letting Ahsoka strike him, then called out her name, his voice being a distorted mix of his real voice and the machine he had become. Tano, though, immediately recognized his voice. There was no doubt now, Anakin Skywalker and Vader were the same person. Recognizing how far he had fallen and feeling responsible for his fall, Ahsoka promised she would never leave him anymore. Despite those sentiments from Ahsoka, Vader barely flinched, telling her that she'll die for this sentiment of hers before resuming their duel. As the duel progressed, the temple began to self-destruct. The floor crumbled, and the energy of the ancient Sith weapons surged violently. Using this instance to his advantage, Vader prepared to deliver the killing blow that would have ended Ahsoka right then and there. However, a gateway from the mystical world between worlds opened, with an older version of Ezra Bridger from the future pulling Tano in to save her from certain death. Vader struck nothing but empty air before falling through the floor into the ruins of the collapsing temple. When he came to himself, he wasn't sure what to make of it, and also wasn't sure if Tano had perished or not. Beaten and wounded, he exited the ruins and limped away. Chapter 12. Vader's Secret Apprentice. Unbeknownst to much of the Empire, Darth Vader had kept a secret apprentice. During the early years of the Imperial era, he traveled to Kashyyyk to hunt down a surviving Jedi named Galen Marek, only to find out this Jedi had a son whose potential in the Force rivaled that of the Emperor's. After killing Kento, Vader took the traumatized boy with him and personally trained him in secret to become his personal assassin. Codenamed Starkiller, the apprentice was tasked with eliminating rogue Jedi all over the galaxy just before the height of the rebellion under Vader's command. As Starkiller killed several Jedi under his master's orders, he became increasingly more powerful in the dark side, to Vader's delight. The goal was to train the apprentice to become strong enough to stand by Vader's side in ultimately toppling the Emperor from his seat of power. And during Starkiller's missions, Vader assigned him a capable pilot named Juno Eclipse, who eventually grew close to the apprentice and, unbeknownst to Vader, would be one of the reasons Starkiller did not completely embrace the darkness. However, despite Vader's best efforts to keep Starkiller's existence a secret, Palpatine's network was too vast. Upon successfully killing a powerful Jedi Master named Shaak Ti, Starkiller was recalled to Vader's ship, the Executor, to rendezvous with his master to finally kill the Emperor. But they found out that the Emperor's spies had followed Starkiller during his missions, ultimately tracing him to Vader. Unbeknownst to Starkiller, the Emperor's flagship had traveled to their location. He believed that Vader had lured his master there so that they could both overthrow him. Unfortunately, the Emperor revealed that he had been aware of the apprentice's existence for some time already. Giving Vader an ultimate, the Emperor ordered him to eliminate the apprentice. Vader knew there was no point to face the Emperor head-on, thus he ignited his crimson saber and impaled Starkiller through the chest. He then pushed Starkiller out of the ship to leave him to die in the cold vacuum of space. However, he knew that it would be a pity to let Starkiller die this easily. He secretly ordered droids to pick up Starkiller and fix him up, saving his life. However, Palpatine yet again got wind of Vader's action and forced him to use his apprentice for a greater goal. Vader was ordered to use Starkiller to try and round up the ever-growing enemies of the Emperor. Vader did as asked, telling Starkiller to round up enemies under the guise that they'll help himself and Starkiller to overthrow the Emperor. Starkiller did as told, and managed to round up a band of rebels, including some prominent senators and Ram Koda, a former Jedi Master, all while slowly drifting away from the path of darkness thanks in large part to his newfound allies. But still, he believed in Vader's words that they'll overthrow the Emperor together. But when he transmitted the location of the rebel base, Vader arrived and arrested each one of them before leaving Starkiller for dead. Vader knew that defying the Emperor was pointless, and thus saw no more use for Starkiller. But right before he could land the killing blow, Starkiller's droid Proxy distracted him with a holographic image of Obi-Wan Kenobi, allowing the apprentice to drop down a cliff. Vader assumed he died from the fall and took his prisoners to the construction site aboard the first Death Star, where the Emperor was awaiting him. However, he didn't expect Starkiller's resolve. He had survived the fall and come after him, boarding the Death Star to rescue the senators and his allies. Vader, sensing his apprentice, went out to face him in the intent to finish what he had started. But to his surprise, Starkiller fought with a resolve like he had never seen before in any enemy he had faced. Unable to keep up, Starkiller managed to severely damage his suit and throw him into the Emperor's throne room. He had lost the duel and was trying his best to stay conscious. Sidious, who was a witness to the duel, was deeply disappointed by the outcome. After all, he spent years orchestrating Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side, only for Darth Vader to become a slow, crippled, and defective shell of his former self. The loss to Starkiller, who had assumed his birth name Galen Marek, was the ultimate sign of Vader's weakness as an apprentice. Wishing to lure Marek back to the dark side, Palpatine tempted the apprentice with the idea of power. He ordered him to kill Vader and take his place as the new apprentice. Despite the temptation, Marek resisted and attacked the Emperor, only for Sidious to attack Ram Koda with Force Lightning. The apprentice, however, took the blast himself and eventually died protecting his allies. Vader recovered from his loss and confirmed to his master that Galen Marek was indeed dead. Feigning ignorance at his master's desire to see him replaced, the Dark Lord swore to hunt down the rebels in the name of the Empire. On the inside, though, his mind was racing with rage. He couldn't believe that Marek had bested him. The only reason he was alive was more due to luck than anything else, and he recognized that he had never been this close to death before. As for Palpatine, he simply tolerated Vader's existence, knowing it would be unwise to kill him right then and there, as he still needed a dog to order around. But it had become clear that this relationship was on the brink of an implosion, with Vader understanding that he was also expendable to the Emperor. It had been yet another test, and he failed it for the first time since being the apprentice of Palpatine. Chapter 13, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Vader survived the events on Malachor and had no leads on Ahsoka. Despite that, it was clear that the Spectre's actions as well as others had ignited smaller and isolated rebellions throughout the galaxy. This was now more of a military matter instead of a Sith affair. As such, it now required the expertise of a military leader, the very best the Empire had to offer. The Emperor summoned Vader to his palace on Coruscant, where he was introduced to the newly promoted Grand Admiral Thrawn. But while this was the first time he met the Chiss tactician as Darth Vader, they had already met before during the Clone Wars. Back then, Anakin Skywalker and Thrawn, who was still working for the Chiss Ascendancy, temporarily allied with one another. Their alliance allowed each other to learn more about their tendencies, with Skywalker learning about Thrawn's genius and Thrawn learning about Anakin's bold tactics. But as Thrawn was yet to learn that Vader and Anakin were one and the same, the Dark Lord simply told the Grand Admiral he was pleased to finally meet him. As these two exchanged pleasantries, the galaxy was shifting beneath their feet. Mon Mothma, a defiant senator from Chandrila, finally united the scattered insurgent cells into the Alliance to restore the Republic. This act ignited the Galactic Civil War, confirming the worst fears of Imperial leadership. The rebellion was now a formal declaration of war against the Empire. But the task of dealing with the Spectres and some of the more dangerous rebels was left to Thrawn and the other military leaders. Vader, meanwhile, was sent out on smaller skirmishes against insurgents. However, he was soon tasked to meet Thrawn on Coruscant yet again. He learned there that Thrawn had recently suffered a strategic blemish at Atollon, where rebels escaped his grasp despite managing to destroy their base. Darth Vader viewed this failure with disdain, for he tolerated nothing less than absolute victory. Yet the Emperor saw fit to bind their fates together once more. He commanded them to travel to the remote world of Batuu, where a disturbance in the Force waited at the edge of the galaxy. They departed with their respective forces, including Vader's elite soldiers from the 501st Legion. Upon the mysterious world of Batuu, they faced a terrifying new threat known as the Grisks. But the true shock came when they discovered the source of the disturbance. It was a group of Chiss children who navigated the unknown regions using the Force. To Vader's astonishment, the Chiss called these navigators Skywalkers, a name that echoed a past he tried to bury. This revelation brought old memories to the surface and tested the fragile alliance between the two commanders. As their partnership continued, Thrawn managed to deduce that the Sith Lord and the Jedi Anakin Skywalker were the same man. Unlike Tano, who used the Force to sense Anakin's presence, Thrawn merely relied on his logic, as the former Skywalker's old habits were yet to die. Vader's tactics and bold maneuvers were similar to the Jedi Knight Thrawn had worked with in the past. As such, he was one of the few people in the galaxy to correctly deduce Vader's secret persona. However, the Grand Admiral wisely chose to view them as separate entities, for he knew Skywalker was truly dead. Vader still questioned where Thrawn's true loyalties lay, fearing the Chiss strategist cared more for his own people than the Empire. But Thrawn proved his worth during the conflict, promising to Vader that he would stay with the Empire instead of returning to the Chiss ascendancy to help his people against the Grisks. Then, in a rare moment of respect, Vader agreed to support Thrawn's TIE Defender project before the Emperor, suggesting upgrades to make the vessel even deadlier. Long after they left, the people of Black Spire Outpost on Batuu whispered rumors of the Dark Lord's visit for years to come. Chapter 14. Another attempt to resurrect Padme. Not too long ago, Vader worked together with the spirit of Darth Momin in the hopes of opening a doorway to the past. He wanted to bring Padme Amidala more than anything, but while that attempt failed, he saw another opportunity. The Sith Lord found his obsession reignited when he discovered the existence of the Aeon Engine. He unearthed the tragic tale of Lady Corvax, a powerful figure from Mustafar's history who had attempted to restore her fallen husband to life using a sacred artifact known as the Bright Star to power an ancient machine. Although history remembered the process as a catastrophic failure that scorched the planet's surface, Vader believed that Corvax had only failed due to her lack of strength in the Force. He was confident that he possessed the power she lacked, but he soon discovered that only those of Corvax's blood could operate it. Vader was undeterred by this ancient security measure, for his reach across the galaxy was absolute. He scoured the stars for any survivors in Lady Corvax's bloodline, a search that eventually bore fruit. He discovered that Corvax had an heir in the form of a smuggler. Vader then found the smuggler and used the descendant to access the Aeon Engine. The Dark Lord communicated with the Black Bishop, a mysterious ally in his search for the Aeon Engine, and they discussed how the Bright Star would give Vader the incredible powers needed to resurrect the dead. But he dismissed the Bishop once he sensed a sudden, painful echo of Padme's soul resonating through the Aeon Engine. Vader let out a wail of fury and sorrow as her voice quickly disappeared after announcing the pregnancy she had carried in life. He and the smuggler then worked together to go through Corvax Fortress in Mustafar, where Vader acted as a mentor in the Force to the smuggler, training him in the basics of the Force. The training continued until they reached the deeper parts of the fortress. Suddenly, a massive creature known as a dark ghast attacked them, forcing Vader to let go of the smuggler to fight the beast. Despite the separation, Vader caught up to the smuggler just as they had retrieved the Bright Star, for the smuggler had intended to betray him. Vader beat them to the punch, retrieved the artifact, and left them stranded in the cave. He then placed the Bright Star on the Aeon Engine and began the ritual to resurrect Padme, determined to save his wife, even if it meant sacrificing other planets to fuel the machine. Padme's face began to emerge from the energy with her voice repeating words from long ago, indicating that the ritual was working. However, the smuggler re-emerged to stop the ritual, knowing the potential catastrophe the device could cause. Vader engaged his brief apprentice in a duel, vowing that he would succeed where Lady Corvax had failed. As the smuggler resisted Vader's attacks, the Bright Star energies coalesced, causing a bluish projection of Amidala to appear in full form. Vader paused the duel, holding the smuggler in a chokehold, but he realized too late that the conflict was affecting the engine. Padme's projection faded, and Vader became furious as he blamed his failure on the smuggler. He proceeded to overpower his opponent, but the Black Bishop intervened, stopping Vader temporarily. This gave the smuggler the opening needed to destroy the Eon engine. The device exploded, sending the two adversaries flying apart and leaving Vader once again alone with his failure. Padme was gone, and there was no way to get her back. Chapter 15: The Death Star Crisis. In the greater galaxy, the rebellion had been rising, and the Empire was trying to quell the embers of a civil war before it could turn into a bonfire. To that end, they needed the secret superweapon more than ever. The Death Star was the power that could end the rebellion before it could take off completely. Meanwhile, Grand Admiral Thrawn understood more than anyone that Vader was the only individual within the Empire capable of truly protecting the Death Star project. This was a task Vader accepted with reluctance, for he held a deep disdain for the battle station. To the Sith Lord, the technological terror was an abomination that mocked the true nature of power. He also had a suspicion that there was a weakness in that massive structure. Yet Thrawn knew that Vader's ruthlessness was required to root out threats. Vader's involvement in the Death Star deepened shortly after the destruction of Jedha City, when the Empire used it as a display of a fraction of what the superweapon could do. But as Vader was resting in his Bacta tank, director Orson Krennic, the man behind the Death Star project, had arrived to explain recent security failures. During their brief audience, Vader commanded Krennic to ensure the treacherous Galen Erso had not compromised the weapon, fearing that his hunches about the Death Star's weakness were true. After all, it was only logical that the engineer who wasn't aware that he was building a weapon for the longest time might deliberately sabotage it. Soon after his meeting with Krennic, though, he was informed that the Rebellion fleet, in one of their greatest displays of power, had gathered above the tropical world of Scarif. Rebel spies had infiltrated the security complex to steal the Death Star's blueprints. Vader immediately left for Scarif on his Star Destroyer. The same for Tarkin aboard the Death Star. This was their chance to destroy the Rebellion. Aboard the Devastator, Vader's flagship Star Destroyer, he arrived just in time while the battle was still on. As the Rebel fleet attempted to flee with the stolen plans, Vader boarded their lead vessel in order to get the plans himself. They were too important to be left in the hands of the Rebels despite his disdain for the Death Star. However, after fighting his way through the Rebel soldiers, he could only watch as a Corellian corvette carrying the plans escaped at the last second and went into hyperspace. In an instant, Vader ordered the Devastator to pursue and linked up with it. They managed to chase it down to the desert planet of Tatooine, where the Devastator quickly overtook the smaller vessel. Vader's troops stormed the ship, and the Sith Lord then boarded the vessel himself, demanding the location of the plans. However, despite his best efforts, none of the crew members revealed their location to him. Then the Princess of Alderaan, Leia, was brought before Vader. Just before her capture, she managed to hide the plans with the droids R2-D2 and C-3PO and sent them in an escape pod down to the surface. She feigned outrage at Vader, claiming diplomatic immunity as a member of the Imperial Senate. But Vader obviously knew that she was lying, branding her a traitor and a member of the Rebel Alliance. He ordered his commander to send a detachment to the surface to retrieve the plans, while he took the princess into custody. On the journey back to the Death Star, Vader informed Leia that the Emperor had dissolved the Imperial Senate, leaving her with no political shield. Upon arrival at the battle station, she was thrown into a detention cell. Vader then joined Grand Moff Tarkin in a conference room filled with the Empire's high command. An arrogant Admiral Motti dared to mock Vader's devotion to the Force, calling it an ancient religion. Vader responded by constricting Motti's windpipe with his mind, only releasing him when Tarkin intervened. As the search for the Rebel base grew desperate, Vader attempted to extract the information from Leia using a torture droid, but her will was strong. Realizing pain would not break her, Tarkin told Vader that he had a better method in mind to get her to talk. They brought the Death Star to the Alderaan system and threatened to destroy her home planet. Leia, hoping to save her people, lied and claimed the base was on Dantooine. Tarkin, wishing to demonstrate the station's power, ordered the destruction of Alderaan regardless. Vader held the princess back as she watched the super laser obliterate her world, a tragic silence falling over the galaxy, as millions of voices cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. Vader felt the tremor in the Force, but felt indifference toward the millions of lives lost. Chapter 16. An Old Friend Returns. As Vader awaited any feedback on their search on Tatooine aboard the Death Star, he was informed that there had been an unregistered ship whose passengers were missing and running loose on the Death Star. Vader concluded that this ship might be there to return the stolen plans to the princess. He went to the hangar to inspect the deserted ship himself. The flight logs indicated the crew had abandoned ship after takeoff, but Vader sensed something far more significant than a deception. A tremor rippled through the Force, a presence he had not felt in nearly 10 years. It was Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was here, aboard the Death Star. Shocked at this revelation, Vader ordered the ship scanned, but his mind was already set on a singular goal: the destruction of his former Jedi Master. When news arrived that the princess had been liberated from her detention block, Vader realized the distraction for what it was. He headed for the tractor beam terminal near the hangar bay, deciding he would face his old master alone. Vader found Kenobi waiting for him near the open blast doors. The old Jedi had just deactivated the tractor beam to allow the freighter to escape, and he ignited his blue lightsaber, ready to face his old pupil. The two dueled with their sabers, showing their skills and mastery with their blade. It was a stalemate, with neither side gaining the advantage. Kenobi, however, warned his former apprentice that he could not win, for if Vader struck him down, he would become more powerful than the Sith could possibly imagine. As their blades clashed, they moved toward Bay 327. There, Kenobi saw the others rushing to board the Falcon, and his eyes locked onto the young man called Luke among them. Knowing he needed to buy time for the young rebels, Kenobi smiled and raised his blade in a gesture of surrender. Vader did not hesitate and swung his lightsaber through the old man. However, the blade went right through his robes, and to his surprise, there was no body to fall to the floor. Kenobi had vanished, his physical form disappearing as he became one with the Force. Confused at the sight, Vader stomped on the empty brown robes. His attention then turned toward the fleeing rebels, but the hangar doors slammed shut as the Falcon blessed its way out of the hangar. Vader watched them go. Their plan had worked, as they had placed a homing beacon on the ship. The Falcon would lead the Empire straight to the hidden rebel base. The Empire tracked the Falcon to the moon of Yavin 4. As the massive station moved into orbit to destroy the rebel base, the Alliance launched a desperate attack with X-Wings and Y-Wings. Tarkin refused to believe the small fighters posed a threat, but Vader knew better. When he learned the rebels were targeting a thermal exhaust port, Vader decided to deal with the threat personally, understanding that the Death Star was compromised as he had feared. He boarded his TIE Advanced and led a squadron into the trench. Vader dismantled the rebel assault, nearly putting an end to the rebels' plans of destroying the Death Star while destroying every X-Wing and Y-Wing in sight. This left only the lead pilot, the young boy he had seen in the hangar. Vader sensed the Force was strong with this one, stronger than any pilot he had faced. He locked his targeting computer onto the X-Wing, preparing to end the rebellion with a single squeeze of the trigger. But just as he was about to fire, the Millennium Falcon dove out. Han Solo fired on the TIE fighters flanking Vader, causing a necessary distraction. The impact sent Vader's TIE spinning uncontrollably out of the trench and into the void of deep space. Moments later, the Death Star was consumed in a massive explosion that killed Tarkin and dealt a crippling blow to the Empire. Vader had failed to protect it and was the sole survivor. Chapter 17: The Yavin Aftermath. The destruction of the Death Star forced Darth Vader to find refuge elsewhere as his TIE crashed on Val. He abandoned his TIE and fought his way through the jungle to send a signal to the Devastator. After reaching the station, he managed to get a ship to pick him up and ordered an Imperial fleet to amass and lock down Yavin to prevent the rebels from escaping the planet. The rebels, though, had already evacuated big parts of the station. The Empire had lost. Not only the Death Star, but the rebellion had gotten away with it. Vader felt a sense of fear to come face to face with Palpatine, as he feared his retribution for his failure. He had nothing to present or make up for this catastrophe, so instead he decided to keep the Emperor updated via holo messages instead of returning to Coruscant and focus on the hunt for the pilot responsible for the Death Star's demise. He sensed a strength in the Force within his mysterious rebel that rivaled his own. Vader recalled seeing a young man grieving for Obi-Wan Kenobi and knew the ship they traveled on hailed from Tatooine. Soon after, Darth Vader arrived at the weapons factory Alpha on Simoon 1 to meet with a representative of Jabba the Hutt to enforce a deal to use their hyperspace lanes. However, the representative turned out to be none other than Han Solo, there on a mission for the rebellion in disguise. As Vader entered the facility, he was immediately shot at by a bowcaster. Vader reacted, quickly deflecting the bolts before crushing the balcony that the Wookiee stood on with the Force. Then, Vader sensed a disturbance in the Force, for he felt the presence of the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. An Imperial officer came running out informing the Dark Lord that the factory had been sabotaged and its reactor was on a meltdown. Vader, though, ignored this information. The boy he was hunting was here, on this station. He went into the factory and then stood face to face with a young man. He had blonde hair, was wearing a yellow jacket. Something about his presence seemed familiar to Vader, but he couldn't quite put his finger on to what exactly. As Vader stood there, the boy activated a blue lightsaber and charged at him. Vader quickly parried him, though, and disarmed him with ease and snatched his lightsaber with the Force. As he was about to kill the boy, as he didn't want to disclose any information, he suddenly froze as his attention was turned toward the boy's weapon. He stared at the lightsaber he had built long ago as Anakin Skywalker, a ghost from a past he thought was dead. The moment was shattered when a hijacked AT-AT walker crashed through the facility walls. Piloted by Solo and Princess Leia, they tried to crush Vader with one of its feet, but Vader caught it with the Force and then brought the whole walker crashing down onto its knees. However, the destruction caused from it allowed the rebels to board a speeder and escape on it. As Vader watched the Falcon disappear into the skies above, he did not feel defeated, for he had gained something. He knew Kenobi had hidden the boy from him. Vader vowed to Kenobi's ghost that he would find the boy's true identity and turn him to the dark side. However, after this recent failure, he had no choice but to return to Coruscant and face his master. Vader returned to the Imperial Palace on Coruscant to answer for the disaster at Simoon 1. Palpatine reminded his apprentice that the recent near collapse of the Empire was rooted in Vader's own plan to allow the rebels to escape with the Death Star plans. As punishment for his failure, the Emperor placed Vader under the command of Grand General Cassio Tag. It was a severe humiliation for the Dark Lord, who previously answered only to the Emperor himself. He saw Tag as inferior, as he didn't know anything about the Force, nor could he hold any power over him. But Palpatine dismissed Vader with orders to conclude negotiations with Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. During their audience, a mysterious agent named Silo appeared, yet the Emperor refused to reveal his identity to his apprentice. When Palpatine asked for any further news, Vader made a perilous choice to remain silent. He hid the truth about Obi-Wan Kenobi's mysterious disappearance after his death, as well as the existence of the Force-sensitive pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. With these secrets locked away in his mind, Vader boarded a Star Destroyer to set out for his new mission. On Tatooine, Vader proceeded to secure the hyperspace access from Jabba the Hutt. However, there was a bounty on the Sith Lord's head, and Jabba foolishly thought he could profit off of Vader. The Sith Lord, however, thwarted the attempt on his life and choked the Hutt's throat with the Force. Jabba then quickly mentioned that Vader had earned his respect as he was a powerful being, and agreed to help Vader by lending him two of his best hunters, Boba Fett and Black Chrysanthemum, to Vader's personal cause. Before leaving to brief the bounty hunters, Vader indulged his hatred by slaughtering a camp of Tusken Raiders, channeling the rage of the man he used to be. He then tasked Chrysanthemum with hunting down Silo, Palpatine's mysterious agent, and sent Fett to capture the young pilot who destroyed the Death Star alive. The next day, Vader returned in an official capacity to negotiate the supply lines for the Empire. Jabba greeted him as a friend, ignoring their violent encounter from the day before. The Hutt invited Vader aboard his sail barge to witness an execution at the Great Pit of Carkoon, a spectacle Jabba claimed was of great entertainment. As the barge drifted over the dunes, Jabba pushed his luck by asking about the private bounties Vader had commissioned. He mused that the rebel pilot must have been trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi given his skill. The mention of his former master froze Vader, and he demanded to know everything the Hutt knew about Kenobi's time on the desert world. However, Jabba knew very little about Obi-Wan's time on Tatooine. In silence, Vader watched the twin suns set on the world he once called home as he thought about how it was unusual for that skilled pilot to have been born on such a planet. After securing Jabba's support, Vader left for Fondor. At Fondor, the massive Super Star Destroyer known as the Executor was finally completed. Darth Vader wasted no time in testing this terrifying weapon, for he ordered a course for Lactine, where he obliterated a rebel depot they had just discovered to show the power of their new weapon to the galaxy. He knew that the Executor had to be the key to defeat the rebellion. He then met up with Tag, who informed Vader that the Death Star was a mistake in his eyes and should be considered Tarkin's folly. But Vader debunked Tag as he felt that Tarkin at least had a vision which Tag missed dearly. Tag was someone who felt that they shouldn't focus the Empire's resources on just one powerful weapon like the Death Star or Vader himself, but rather build up a broader army. Vader looked at Tag curiously and then left for his next mission. There was some truth to what the Grand General spoke. Chapter 18. A Challenge from Palpatine. Vader's main focus, though, was still to find the Force-sensitive pilot who destroyed the Death Star. But first, he was informed by Black Krrsantan that he had captured the Imperial agent Silo and was bringing him to Vader. Vader had the sadistic droid 000 interrogate the agent, which led to his death. However, he found out that Silo had built a base that was supposed to create beings to replace Vader. After hearing this, Vader immediately departed for this base. He eventually worked together with Dr. Cheli Iona Afra, an archaeologist, to form a private droid army consisting of commando droids from the Clone Wars to enter heavily guarded factory, as it wasn't really an official matter of the Empire. However, to Vader's surprise, after fighting through several challenges, Silo reappeared in a new body shortly afterward, challenging Vader's place within the Empire. He wanted to achieve this by creating several cybernetic creatures meant to serve as the Sith Lord's replacements. Vader, though, didn't really have the patience to listen to his blabbering. As he was about to strike down Silo 5, though, the Emperor's voice seared through the room. He wanted Vader to face the challenge of Silo's creation. Vader grudgingly accepted and started fighting off these mechanical creations, which weren't unlike the late droid general Grievous formed the Clone Wars. He eventually managed to destroy some of them, but before killing them, Palpatine intervened yet again, saying there was still use in these for the Empire, and ordered one of these cybernetic creations called Carbon to hunt for the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. Vader condemned Silo's creations as a profane mockery of the Force, but the Emperor rebuked him, reminding Vader that he had failed on Mustafar and left Palpatine no choice but to turn to Silo. As Palpatine departed, he remarked that perhaps in time, Vader might yet prove himself worthy of the name he had been given. In thought about his master's words, Vader went to meet with the bounty hunter Boba Fett aboard the Executor. While Fett failed to capture the rebel, he delivered a name that shattered Vader's reality. The boy who had destroyed the Death Star was named Luke Skywalker. Alone in the cold void of space, the Sith Lord's rage cracked the viewport as he realized the Emperor had lied about Padme and their unborn child. He remembered Padme's pregnancy and was certain that this boy was his son. He contacted his master, yet chose to hide the truth from his master for now. Meanwhile, General Tag sought to crush the criminal underworld, ordering Darth Vader to dismantle the Sontul Pride. Vader succeeded in that mission, only for Tag to notice that the Sith Lord was oddly distracted by the thoughts of the pilot who destroyed the Death Star. Afra, who had been assigned by Vader to find Skywalker before the cyborg Carbon, confirmed that Padme had been given birth to a son before she died. As she searched the galaxy for Skywalker, Vader had to appease Tag as he went on multiple skirmishes under Tag's orders. His work was interrupted when he learned of Luke Skywalker's location on Vrogus Vas. Driven by obsession, the Sith Lord arrived alone and faced 3 entire Rebel starfighter squadrons. He, however, decimated their ranks, for his skills as a pilot were unmatched. It wasn't until Luke Skywalker crashed his X-Wing into Vader's TIE that Vader was forced to crash land on the surface of Vrogus Vas. The Alliance saw a chance to kill him, and thus sent out several Rebel troops in hopes to kill Vader. However, Vader slaughtered each and every single one of the rebels until he stood in front of Leia Organa. She had called in an airstrike on her own position in hopes of killing Vader, but their confrontation was cut short when suddenly Vader was attacked by the cyborg Carbon, who had tracked Skywalker to Vrogus Vas as well. Wanting to gain the glory of capturing Luke, a duel ensued where Vader eventually killed the cyborg. However, Leia and Luke had both escaped by that time. Vader was once again back to ground zero. Chapter 19. Tying Up Loose Ends. At the shipyards of Kuat, Vader met with his master aboard the Executor. Palpatine revealed that the scientist Silo had outlived his usefulness and needed to be purged as he had grown too powerful for Palpatine's liking. Vader was gleeful at the chance to kill the scientist, thus went to hunt him down. After defeating a cybernetically enhanced Rancor, Vader stood in front of Silo, but the rival played his final card by activating a remote that instantly deactivated Vader's life support suit. The Dark Lord collapsed as his cybernetics failed him. Suddenly, a Force vision was granted to him as he felt his body failing without the suit's life support. In the vision, he saw Obi-Wan and his younger self on Mustafar. However, this time, he emerged as Darth Vader after being thrown into the lava river by Kenobi and killed him. After Kenobi vanished into thin air, suddenly he had Anakin Skywalker standing in front of him. Vader engaged Anakin and also managed to throw him into the flames of Mustafar. After defeating Anakin, he suddenly heard the voice of Padme, seeing her appear before him and begging him to stay with her. But Vader choked Padme's vision and declared that her husband was dead, finally deciding that he was done trying to reunite with his deceased wife. Then, through the sheer power of his will, Vader forced his paralyzed metal body to move. He ignited his blade and impaled Silo, killing the scientist. He went on to destroy all the clone bodies of the scientist, which he used to upload his mind into through technology, killing him once and for all. He then returned to Palpatine, who was most pleased with his apprentice. He allowed Vader to execute General Tag for a previous mistake, and then named him Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet. Following the demise of Silo, Vader commanded Sergeant Creel and his Scar Squadron to hunt down young Skywalker. The rebels had hijacked an Imperial destroyer to aid Tureen 7. He warned Creel to capture Luke unharmed, but the boy escaped using the Force. Annoyed with his failure, Vader sought counsel within his fortress regarding the slowing Imperial progress. General Veers provided a crucial insight. He likened the rebellion to weeds that bent safely beneath a storm while rigid trees snapped. This wisdom struck a chord within the Sith Lord, for it echoed the defiant warnings of Princess Leia. He realized the Empire needed to allow their enemies to gather their strength in one place so they could be crushed with a single blow. To enact this grand design, Vader traveled to Shu Torun to confront Queen Trios. Though she pleaded her loyalty, he demanded a treacherous task. She was to infiltrate the rebellion and aid them in assembling a massive fleet. The plan was to let them build hope and power, only for Vader to obliterate it all when they were most vulnerable. She accepted her role as a pawn in Vader's game. Queen Trios successfully deceived Leia Organa into trusting her before springing a trap at the Makota space docks. When Vader arrived, he ordered the destruction of General Willard's flagship, the Yavin's Hope. The Imperial fleet obliterated the vessel, and Vader declared that their true target was Hope itself. As the rebels scrambled to bypass the sabotage, Han Solo arrived in the Millennium Falcon to aid the crippled fleet. Vader wasted no time entering the fray in his TIE Advanced, pursuing the freighter through the chaos and nearly destroying it until he was forced to return to his flagship to intercept intruders. Rebel forces had boarded the Executor, and the Sith Lord cut through them. He executed Rebel General Draven, but just barely missed capturing Princess Leia, who managed to steal a TIE fighter to escape his grasp. Though a remnant of the Rebel fleet managed to scatter and retreat, the engagement was a devastating blow to the Alliance. Vader contacted the Emperor, assuring his master that the rebellion's defeat was inevitable. Then, Vader had to turn his attention to another loose end, Dr. Aphra. As useful as she was in providing Vader information and eliminating any rival to the Sith's power, she was still a liability, for she knew about Vader's motives and Luke's identity. However, she managed to evade his capture and went into hiding. It didn't really matter to Vader, though, as he had more pressing matters at hand. Chapter 20. The Empire Strikes Back. 3 years had passed since the Death Star's destruction. The Executor drifted silently through the Juris sector. A probe droid sent to the desolate and icy Hoth system reported signs of life, but Admiral Ozzel foolishly dismissed the data as nothing more than smugglers or a false lead. Darth Vader knew better, for he sensed the presence of the Rebel Alliance, and specifically the pilot who destroyed the Death Star. He ordered the fleet to the system immediately, but Ozzel blundered the approach by emerging from lightspeed too close to the planet, which alerted the rebels to their presence. The Alliance raised their energy shield to block an orbital bombardment. Vader did not tolerate such incompetence. He ended Ozzel's life and promoted Captain Piet to Admiral on the spot, ordering him to deploy the fleet so no ship could escape. General Veers led the Imperial ground forces to destroy the power generator, while Vader landed to personally handle the invasion. The Dark Lord marched through the icy corridors of Echo Base, cutting down any rebel trooper foolish enough to stand in his path. He arrived at the main hangar just in time to see the Millennium Falcon lift off. The freighter escaped his grasp once again, but the victory at Hoth still belonged to the Empire, as the rebellion was scattered to the winds. Vader ignored the fleeing rebel transports to focus entirely on the Millennium Falcon, which had fled into a deadly asteroid field due to a hyperdrive malfunction. He ordered the fleet to pursue the freighter despite the risk to his own Star Destroyers, demanding that the rebels be taken alive. Amidst the hunt, the Emperor contacted Vader to discuss a massive disturbance in the Force. Palpatine revealed that the young pilot who destroyed the Death Star was indeed Anakin Skywalker's son. The Emperor feared the boy could destroy them if he became a Jedi. However, Vader saw an opportunity to secure his own legacy. He convinced Palpatine that Luke could be turned to the dark side of the Force, assuring his master that the boy would join them or die. Desperate to capture the boy before the Emperor could intervene, Vader summoned a group of notorious bounty hunters, including Boba Fett and Bossk, to the bridge of the Executor. He promised a substantial reward to whoever could find the Millennium Falcon and its crew alive. Shortly after the briefing, Captain Nita of the Avenger reported that he had lost track of the freighter during the pursuit. Nita bravely attempted to apologize personally to the Sith Lord. Vader accepted the apology by crushing Nita's windpipe, leaving the dead captain on the floor as a warning to those who failed the Empire. The Millennium Falcon limped through space without a functional hyperdrive, unaware that the keen eyes of Boba Fett were tracking its every move. Darth Vader utilized this intelligence to arrive at Cloud City first. The Dark Lord offered the city's administrator, Lando Calrissian, a choice that was hardly a choice at all. Calrissian agreed to betray his old friend Han Solo to keep the Empire away from his Tibanna gas operations, but he did not realize the deal would alter further. When the rebels finally walked into the dining room, they found Vader waiting for them at the head of the table. The Sith Lord had no interest in Solo or the Wookiee, for they were merely bait intended to lure a much bigger prize to Bespin. For years, he had been searching for Luke, and this was the greatest opportunity yet, since he had escaped him twice already before. He subjected Solo to agonizing torture to send ripples of pain through the Force that young Skywalker would feel from Dagobah, where he was learning the Force under Yoda's tutelage. Needing to ensure the carbon freezing facility was safe for the Emperor's prize, Vader ordered Solo to be frozen in carbonite. The smuggler survived the process, so Vader handed the frozen slab to the bounty hunter as payment while ordering the others to be taken to his ship. Luke Skywalker arrived just as his friends were being dragged away, walking straight into the trap Vader had meticulously laid. The two warriors ignited their lightsabers in the carbon freezing chamber. Luke fought with courage and surprising skill, managing to land a glancing blow on the Dark Lord's shoulder. However, experience triumphed over youth as Vader maneuvered his son onto a precarious gantry above a reactor shaft. With a swift movement, Vader severed Luke's hand, sending the young Jedi's weapon tumbling into the abyss. Defeated and cornered, Luke listened as the Dark Lord urged him to embrace the dark side. Vader shattered the boy's reality by revealing that Obi-Wan Kenobi had lied to him about his father being dead. The words, "No, I am your father," rang through the reactor shaft as Luke could not believe what the Dark Lord had revealed. At the same time, the revelation was a twisted olive branch, an offer to destroy the Emperor and bring order to the galaxy as father and son. Gone were the days where Vader had to rely on someone external like Galen Marek. This was his son, his own flesh and blood. What better apprentice could he hope for? But the light within Luke was too strong to be extinguished by the temptation of power. Rather than taking his father's hand, Skywalker let go of the railing and plummeted into the ventilation shaft. With Leia sensing Luke's presence through the Force, the Millennium Falcon swooped in to save the falling Jedi, sparking a desperate chase as the rebels attempted to flee the system. Vader stood on the bridge of the Executor, reaching out through the Force to the fleeing ship, calling Luke his son one last time. Meanwhile, R2-D2 repaired the hyperdrive just in time, allowing the rebels to vanish into hyperspace. As the rebels escaped, Vader stared silently out the viewport, a sense of sadness overcoming him. His son had decided to resist him, rather killing himself than joining in. With that, he turned away from the window to the joy of Admiral Piet, who expected to be executed for failing to capture the fleeing Falcon. Chapter 21, The Bespin Aftermath. Following the escape of the Millennium Falcon, Darth Vader was consumed by a singular obsession to locate the son who had been hidden from him for decades. He boarded a shuttle with a squad of death troopers and a forensics droid named Z-67, traveling back to the sands of Tatooine. There, he visited the Lars homestead to scour the burnt remains for clues about Luke's upbringing, a journey that forced him to recall the painful memory of his mother's funeral. He eventually returned to Coruscant to investigate Padme Amidala's apartment, where his droid discovered a transmitter that pointed them toward the planet Vindaxa. Even when Emperor Palpatine ordered him to hunt down the scattered rebel fleet, Vader refused to abandon his personal quest. Instead, he assigned the task to Commander Elian Zara, a protege of Tarkin, warning her that he would tolerate no failure. Vader's path was a violent one, marked by his intolerance for deception. When he encountered a man in a cantina falsely claiming to be Luke Skywalker, Vader killed the imposter to send a message that anyone claiming the name would answer for the crimes against the Empire. Upon arriving on Vindaxa, Vader was confronted by a face from its past. It was Sabe, the former handmaiden who bore an exact likeness to Padme Amidala. Though she believed Vader had murdered her queen, she agreed to an uneasy alliance to uncover the true circumstances of Padme's death. Together, they traveled to Naboo and braved the depths of its oceans and a resistance group. Vader cut through the resistance, eventually defeating the surviving handmaidens who tried to bar his entry into Padme's tomb. Inside the tomb, he found a medical implant that traced back to an asteroid base named Polis Massa. Vader traveled there and massacred the remaining Amidalans who tried to stop him, clearing his path to the maternity ward where his wife had died. He accessed the damaged memory banks of a medicine machine to watch a recording of Padme's final moments. He saw Obi-Wan Kenobi by her side, but it was her final words that struck the Sith Lord harder than any lightsaber. She insisted with her dying breath that there was still good in him. Vader was left with the haunting knowledge that she had died believing he could be saved. Meanwhile, his master was not pleased. Upon discovering Vader's personal quest, the Emperor summoned his apprentice to the Imperial Palace, where he sensed grief within him. Sidious unleashed his fury through Force lightning to reteach the dark side to his wayward pupil. Though Vader attempted to resist, he was overwhelmed by the Emperor's guards and Massa Meda before Sidious crushed his spirit and ravaged his mechanical body. The Master stripped the apprentice of his limbs and left him battered on the volcanic shores of Mustafar, the very place Obi-Wan had once abandoned him to the flames. Commanded to rebuild himself without the aid of the Force, Vader crawled toward the abandoned Separatist facility, fueling his body with pure rage. Inside the ruins, amidst the rotting corpse of Newt Gunray, Vader fixed his damaged cybernetics with any part he could salvage. After besting a Sith assassin Palpatine sent after him, he repaired his old Jedi Interceptor using scavenged parts and left the Mustafar system. Chapter 22. The Dark Lord and the Handmaiden. Darth Vader's duty as the Emperor's iron fist in the middle of the rebellion manifested when he destroyed the Hutt Council and the Crimson Dawn, two factions whose powers were starting to rival the Empire. However, while he would have preferred to seek his son, the hunt for the Crimson Dawn led him to Sabe yet again. The Handmaiden was a member of Crimson Dawn but had been taken by the Dark Lord. Sabe told the truth. She would never join the Empire, but wanted the same thing Vader wanted: order. Meanwhile, as the Empire rooted out the Crimson Dawn, the Dark Lord asked Sabe if she was afraid of him. The Handmaiden's next words shocked him, for she said that she would never be afraid of the man who was once Anakin Skywalker. The Sith Lord tried to keep his composure, telling Sabe that Anakin was dead. But Sabe explained she deduced Vader and Skywalker were one and the same because they were both obsessed with the circumstances behind Padme's death and with order, even though they had different ways of seeking it. Vader then asked what Sabe wanted. She told him that she wanted to help him bring order to the galaxy and to eliminate the Tantaza, the corrupt governor of a colony of former slaves. Sabe told him that if he would help her, that would mean that Padme was right about Anakin all along, that there was still good in him. To this, Vader accepted her proposal of a partnership. The Dark Lord returned to the sands of his past, not on Tatooine, but on a colony world suffering from an unnatural drought. Among the refugees stood Kitster and Wald, who were the childhood friends of Anakin Skywalker. The pair showed off a vehicle inspired by their days in the desert, unaware that the black-clad being before them was once the boy they knew. Though they offered aid, Vader rejected it. His only goal was to kill the governor. But Tantaza proved to be a formidable foe because she wielded an energy-draining weapon and a technology that could cook up sandstorms. As her back was forced up against the wall, the governor unleashed her sand weapon, forcing Vader to pilot a pod racer once more. He found Kitster and Sabe trapped beneath heavy debris. Vader then ordered Admiral Piet to fire the Executor's turbo lasers directly on their position. The orbital bombardment incinerated the storm and freed them. Then Vader marched upon the governor's facility. He confronted Tantaza in her armored suit and destroyed her weaponry before she fled the exploding fortress. Battered and drained of power, Vader relied on Sabe to restore his life support suit. It was then they discovered the cruel truth that Tantaza had been acting on orders from Emperor Palpatine himself. Sabe smiled, for she believed she saw a flicker of the Jedi hero within the Sith armor because he had saved her life. Upon returning to his own ship, Vader shattered his bacta tank in a rage, refusing to accept that any good remained within him. He turned his sights to new missions and gathered a team of mercenaries, including the cyborg Baylor Valance. He repaired Valance with the Force and warned the hunters to serve him well. Sabe advised him to confront his problems directly, just as he always did. However, Vader stood ready to enforce his will, proving that while Anakin Skywalker's past lingered, Darth Vader's power was absolute. Following the Handmaiden's council, Vader and Sabe marched into the Imperial Palace to face the Emperor. Sidious tested his apprentice's resolve, mocking the Dark Lord's lingering connection to his past life as Anakin Skywalker through Sabe. Vader held her aloft with the Force, but ultimately released her, allowing the former handmaiden to prove her worth by defeating the Emperor's royal guards in combat. Sidious was amused by her skill and permitted her to continue serving as Vader's agent. Their next crusade took them to Skako Minor, where Jewel Tamber plotted an uprising against Imperial rule. The revolutionary had studied Vader's combat history through salvage droids and believed he possessed the knowledge to defeat the Sith Lord. Upon landing on the poisonous world, Vader slaughtered aggressive wildlife and pirates with his usual ruthlessness, but Sabe hesitated and allowed one pirate to flee. When Vader questioned her mercy, she confessed that she no longer knew who deserved it. Vader reminded her that she was his shadow. After his missions on Skako Minor, Vader returned to his meditations aboard the Executor. He reflected on the words of Obi-Wan Kenobi regarding the absolutes of the Sith, yet he needed to ensure his own allies were absolute in their loyalty. He summoned the woman he believed to be Sabe to his chambers, where he ordered the woman to execute 2 loose-lipped stormtroopers. When she hesitated and merely wounded the soldiers during a struggle, Vader knew the truth. This was not Sabe, but rather Dorme, another of Padme's handmaidens. He choked her with the Force and demanded the truth about Sabe's location. Vader took Dorme to the planet Fadal, where her sisters Ertie Sashay and Rabe attempted to ambush the Sith Lord. But their efforts were cut short by a transmission from Jewel Tamber. Their Skakoan revolutionary had captured the real Sabe on Brental 4 and threatened to slaughter innocent refugees if Vader did not come for him. Seeing a common enemy, the handmaidens reluctantly agreed to join forces with the man they hated most. Upon arrival on Brental 4, Vader found himself reflecting on his past on Mustafar and his desire to recreate the outcome he always wanted with Padme. But the reality of war offered no time for sentimentality as Tambor attacked. Vader, however, found an opening to slip into Tambor's ship. The handmaidens freed Sabe and pleaded with her to leave Vader's side forever. As the sisters made their escape, Sabe made a fateful choice. She believed she was the only one who could temper Vader's rage and protect the innocent. Instead of escaping with her sisters, she returned to Vader to defeat Tambor. However, after the duo defeated Tambor, a powerful phenomenon called the Force Wave violently appeared and messed with Vader's control over his powers. The Dark Lord was forced to tear his own ship apart, proving that he was now a danger to the very empire he served. Chapter 23. Taking Back Control. The Force Wave, a phenomenon that appeared after the destruction of Darth Maul's Fermata cage, caused Vader's powers to spiral out of control, making him a danger to the master he swore allegiance to. Even Sidious himself felt Vader becoming a threat from afar, as the cyborg could not contain the chaotic storm his powers brewed. However, the Emperor delighted in the fear his apprentice felt, knowing that fear was merely the precursor to hate. Aboard the Executor, the metal hull groaned and twisted under Vader's erratic influence, threatening to tear the ship apart. Sabe saw the danger and made the hard choice to seal the corridor, effectively casting the Sith Lord out into the cold vacuum of space to save the crew. But even the void could not silence Palpatine's voice, which urged Vader to decide if his hatred would become his power or his suffering. Sabe refused to let the man she once knew as Anakin Skywalker die, so she recovered his floating form with a shuttle. Her mercy was met with destruction, as Vader's unstable connection to the Force tore their vessel apart and forced a crash landing on a desolate, uninhabited island. They survived the fall, but Vader was desperate to regain control and demanded solitude as he carved a path of ruin through the landscape. Sabe persisted, believing that the light of Anakin still flickered beneath the black armor, and she offered him a chance to finally control his own destiny away from the Emperor's strings. In response to her pleas, Vader seized Sabe and forced her into a waking nightmare, a vision meant to test her spirit. He showed her a twisted future where she served the Empire, but he also revealed the darkness within himself by slaughtering phantoms of Padme and his hidden son Luke within that dreamscape. He offered her the same choice Sidious had offered him, demanding she embrace hatred to gain power or face death. But Sabe looked into the abyss and refused to blink, rejecting his path of hate and denying the darkness he wanted her to share. With his offer spurned, Vader used the Force to fling Sabe into the ocean, ending their alliance and ending the person who resembled his wife the most. He shall no longer give in to his temptation. Alone once more, the Sith Lord dragged the wreckage of the shuttle to fashion a primitive electro-staff and shield for his broken body. A group of opportunistic mercenaries arrived soon after, believing the rumors that Vader was crippled and powerless against their superior numbers. They underestimated the monster standing on the beach, for he crushed them with the dark side. As he stood over the burning wreckage, Darth Vader confirmed the lesson Palpatine had taught him, proving that as long as he held on to his hatred, he would always command absolute power. Alone once more, Vader's darkness led him on solitary missions that fueled his hatred. But the only way to truly fuel his rage was to sever his ties with his former self yet again. His crusade against his past later took him to Naboo to destroy the memory of his late wife. Determined to sever his connection to Padme, he ravaged the lakeside retreat where they once fell in love, allowing floodwaters to ruin the structure. He slaughtered anyone who dared speak her name, terrifying the locals who saw him as a spirit of death before leaving Naboo. Chapter 24: Redemption. Nearly 24 years since orchestrating the downfall of the Jedi Order and the birth of the Empire, Sith Lord had resigned himself to a life of eternal servitude, for he believed his master was simply too powerful to overthrow. Vader had tried to plot against Darth Sidious, but those designs had failed, leaving him with the cold certainty that he had no choice but to obey. Together they plotted to turn young Skywalker to the dark side. Vader believed they would form a dark triad, a twisted family of power, yet he was blind to the truth that Sidious intended to replace the broken cyborg with the younger, stronger Skywalker. Vader's only desire was to find his son, for he believed Luke had no choice but to serve the Emperor, just as Vader himself was bound to his master's will. To prepare for the final trap against the Rebel Alliance, Vader traveled to the Endor system to ensure the second Death Star was completed on schedule. He terrified Moff Jerjerrod into accelerating the work, warning him that the Emperor was not as forgiving as he was. When the Emperor eventually arrived, he was greeted by legions of troops and a satisfied Vader. However, the Master sensed the conflict within his apprentice, chiding Vader for his impatience to find young Skywalker. During this time of construction, whispers circulated regarding an Imperial engineer named Acklin. It was said that Acklin stole a Sith ring from Palpatine's private collection to resurrect dead workers as zombies to meet the strict deadlines. The stories claim that Vader discovered this abomination when he investigated a strange officer, only to find himself surrounded by the undead. He cut down the walking corpses with his lightsaber and retrieved the ring, though he allowed the remaining zombies to continue their labor before returning the artifact to his master. Then, Vader remained on his flagship even as intelligence reported the rebel fleet massing near Solust. He sensed a familiar presence aboard a stolen shuttle requesting to land on the forest moon, and he allowed it to pass, for he knew his son was coming for him. Vader descended to the moon's surface to wait. Just as the Emperor predicted, Luke surrendered himself, hoping to spark the light within his father. Vader praised the boy's skills but rejected his pleas, claiming that Anakin Skywalker was truly dead. Too many times had Vader fought the spirit of Anakin and his wife Padme and come out on top. He was truly Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith. He brought his son before the Emperor, who sat watching the space battle erupt outside. Palpatine goaded Luke, urging him to give in to his anger as the rebel fleet fell into a trap. When Luke finally lashed out, Vader ignited his blade to protect his master. They dueled, but Vader did not seek to kill the boy. Instead, he probed Luke's mind and discovered the existence of a twin sister. When Vader threatened to corrupt Leia, Luke's control snapped. The young Jedi attacked with a fury that overwhelmed Vader, battering him down until he severed Vader's mechanical hand. The Emperor laughed, commanding Luke to kill his father and take his place. But Luke looked at his own mechanical hand and realized he was becoming the very thing he fought against. He threw his weapon aside and declared himself a Jedi. Enraged, Palpatine unleashed torrents of Force lightning, torturing the boy. Luke begged his father for help. Vader looked at his suffering son and then at the master he had served for decades. He remembered a similar choice he made involving Mace Windu 23 years prior, but this time he chose differently. Anakin Skywalker's spirit returned, motivated to save the people he loved. With that determination, he lifted the Emperor with his mechanical arms, crushing the Emperor's bones and holding on as tight as possible while lightning struck at his suit. He walked forwards and then tossed the Sith down the reactor shaft. As he hung onto the railing, he watched as his master fell down the shaft before exploding into a million pieces. He had killed Palpatine. In his final act, the redeemed Jedi ended the Sith and fulfilled his destiny. The words of Obi-Wan came back to Anakin. He was the one to destroy the Sith, and finally he had done it. He knew now who he was after going through so much darkness as Vader. He had lived a life full of regret, but now he knew that he had made one right decision. Chapter 25: The Chosen One. As the Rebel Alliance struck the final blow against the second Death Star, celebrations erupted across the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker was no longer the Empire's enforcer known as Vader, and he was dragged by his son to a waiting shuttle. Knowing his life was fading, he made one final request. He asked Luke to remove the black mask that had imprisoned him for decades so he could look upon his son with his own eyes for the first and only time, even though it meant he would die. When the heavy helmet was lifted, Anakin did not see a Jedi enemy, but the child he made with Padme. He gave Luke a gentle smile, a warmth that had been absent from the galaxy since the fall of the Republic. Luke insisted that he had to save his father, but the redeemed Anakin told him he already had. He asked Luke to tell his sister that she was right about the good remaining within him. As he took his final breath, his thoughts reached out to his lost wife, hoping to tell her their son had saved him. He passed away in Luke's arms while the Empire collapsed around them. However, his selfless sacrifice allowed his spirit to endure. Luke escaped the explosion with his father's body and brought him to the forest moon of Endor. There, he built a funeral pyre and burned the dark armor in solitude. Anakin Skywalker had finally fulfilled his destiny. He joined Yoda and Obi-Wan in the Force, a hero once more.